The Mass Effect games. All of us have heard of them, many of us have played them, and some of us waited 2 whole console generations before getting them through EA Play and writing a 2 hour long critique of them. Guess which niche I fall into? This video is divided into 4 sections. One section each for the analyses of the 3 games, and a final overview of the trilogy, which is accompanied by speculation about the upcoming sequel, since we have all decided to wipe Andromeda from our memories. Without further ado, let's get started. Seems like every time I expect to have a certain kind of reaction to a game, my actual impressions of it go in the exact opposite direction. I expected to like Dark Souls 2, but I ended up hating it enough to make an hour-long video of my disdain of it. I also expected to get bored of Mass Effect 1 within 5 or so hours of playing it, but having completed the game, most of its side quests, and even having obtained the platinum, I have nothing but love for this stellar, interstellar classic. Due to my own proclivities, I find that RPGs with too much dialogue or too many things to read enrapture me for a few hours before inevitably being placed high on my pile of shame. I just don't have the patience for following a 200-hour long story when other gameplay mechanics simply aren't engaging. But that's not what happened with Mass Effect, and in this video I'll try to lay out all the reasons why Mass Effect is the best RPG I have ever played. The story of Mass Effect had me hooked right from the start. After creating a custom Shepard, a mistake I'll never make again, and being rushed to Eden Prime only to see one of my companions be killed in action before having a new one join me almost immediately, I knew I was in for a ride. I must admit that after that initial run-in with Saren and his army of Geth, I wasn't sold on him as a villain, but the intrigue built around the visions and the sheer scale of the universe BioWare had managed to build had me in awe. Going to the Citadel right after Eden Prime gives the players an opportunity to learn about the diverse races and their unique characteristics. Even the more minor, non-council races such as the Elcor have idiosyncrasies, the unique way in which they emote. Sure, I could argue that the side quests that you're doing on here don't really have much depth to them, regularly being fetch quests that have you going from point A to point B and then returning. But when the stories behind these quests are so intriguing, and the setting you're running around in is so full of mystery itself, I'd keep an eye on those keywords if I were you. That argument doesn't hold substantial weight. On the Citadel, you also start assembling your crew, and boy do I love this crew. Sometimes the crew members can come across as exposition devices who add to your knowledge about the different races they represent. Tali in particular falls in this trap, but each of them have their own stories as well. And how can you complain when Garrus looks this damn handsome? In its initial phases, the story can seem a bit rushed, with Shepard being declared a scepter by the judges on The Voice who wouldn't believe about the existence of an ancient alien race unless they hit them in the face, which they did in my playthrough. And the story would probably benefit from having a longer prologue where we go on a mission or two with Shepard, Caden, and Jenkins, but I can't really complain when the game opens up the entire universe to you and allows you to choose your own adventure once this section is over. And so I found myself with my first major decision in the game, and it wasn't even limited to the Paragon and Renegade system. Did I want to go to the frozen lands of Novaria, the colony of Feroz, or the mining systems of Therium first? Well, for me the choice was simple. None of them. I decided to explore the different star systems first. Can't save the galaxy if I am not ridiculously overleveled. The side quests here are of vastly varying quality. Since this section is about the story and the story alone, I'll just tell you about the ones I found most interesting. Garrus' loyalty quest was one of my favorites of the game. It was simple, but it gave me a deeper understanding into who this beautiful boy was. It did culminate in me teaching him the rather dubious lesson that murder is good, so maybe I made some wrong choices along the way. Can't really be sure. Another quest that I really enjoyed was one that I just sort of stumbled upon. While going from system to system exploring the galaxy, I came across a seemingly empty space station. On further investigation, I found a man hooked up to a life support system. Exploring the station a little more, I found logs from when the station was more populated, and I learned that the man had been a vegetable for a while now, and there was no saving him, and that his wife, unable to accept this reality, slowly lost her sanity, desperately trying to find a cure. That's when his wife came at me and my squad, guns a-blazing, and I was forced to kill her. I then decided to pull the plug on the man's life support system because I felt like he deserved peace after all that had happened. The quest was rather simple in structure, but its emotional ramifications and the ethical considerations of euthanasia still have me thinking about it. After planet hopping for a while, I decided to land on Pharos, and promptly got turned into the colony's savior after accidentally solving all of their problems. I got lost in the sewers and just sort of did everything and came back up to collect the rewards. After getting a pat on the back and a whole bunch of credits, Shepard made their way to the Exogeny headquarters, where we were met with the age-old message of corporations bad. After a bit of exposition about Exogeny, we returned to the Zoo's Hope colony to find that the experiments of the corporation on the Thorian, a peaceful plant that dabbles in mind control, have led the colonists to turn against us. Now we have a choice. Either we can kill all the colonists that stand in our way, or we can use an anti-Thorian gas to paralyze them till we deal with the mandrake itself. Shep can also stab these colonists into unconsciousness, but some are more resistant to this than others. Seriously, Alicia, let me save you. Shep finds the Thorian, making quick work of it and saving an Asari who talks like an LA influencer.
Every action sends ripples across the galaxy. Every idea must touch another mind to live.
Peros was my favorite lead of the three because your actions on the planet determine the fates of the colonists. If you make the effort of saving the colonists, fixing their water systems, and give the people a leader, Zoo's Hope can heal itself. Get too trigger happy though, and it'll be in ruins. The next arc I followed took me to Therium, where I got to recruit Liara, who soon became an irreplaceable part of my squad. She goes down in a few hits, but her biotic prowess is useful to have. Plus, she taught me a lot about the enigmatic Asari. These age-entered beings, their unique mating rituals, and their connection to the universe was fascinating. So fascinating, in fact, that I decided to romance Liara to learn about it in intimate detail. At least that's the excuse I used when a friend walked in on me trying to skip the rather steamy cutscene that this romance path culminates in. Video games are a mature medium of storytelling, after all. After calling the council only to cut the line once again, God, I'm such a renegade, I went to Vermeer, where Saren had set up a new Krogan breeding facility. This led to some internal conflict in the group. See, the Krogan were essentially neutered by the Salarians, and Rex, reasonably, sought the cure to this genophage that would allow his kind to repopulate. Depending on your decisions here, you might have to murder Rex. I, thankfully, had formed a deeper bond with him already and had also invested sufficiently in charm and intimidate to prevent this eventuality. Leading the assault on Saren's facility has you make other tough decisions as well. Depending on how generous you're feeling, you can either make life easier for yourself or draw more attention to yourself to save the Salarian army. The Salarians who were captured previously can also be found here, and some of them can be saved, while others, having undergone an indoctrination procedure, will attack you if you let them out of their cages. Fight through the facility, and you will also have to decide whether you want to save Caden or Ashley. There's no way to save both, which adds pressure to the situation and forces you to make a really tough decision. Or at least it would have been a tough decision if I didn't find both of them to be annoying. Caden is a biotech major, but unlike other biotech majors, he has no career prospects because I always drop him off at the Normandy. The only reason I even chose him over Ashley was because his backstory was more interesting, and also because Ashley was borderline a space racist. On Vermeer, you also learn that Saren's ship, Sovereign, which is capable of mind control, isn't actually a ship at all. It's one of the Reapers. The Reapers are the main antagonists of the whole trilogy, and they are scary. Every 50,000 years, the Reapers destroy all living organisms in the universe, and the visions Shepard saw were of them in action. What makes the concept of the Reapers even more terrifying for me is that they reside in deep space. The space beyond space. Something about them being able to survive unseen in a corner of the universe that nobody can even traverse, waiting to deliver the next mass extinction, is simply frightening. After fighting Saren in his best Green Goblin cosplay, man couldn't even get the color right, I returned to the ship with one teammate down and finally made my way to Novaria. This snowy planet features a very cool space hotel as well as a research facility straight out of the Aliens franchise. These sentient insects, the Arachni, are terrorizing a small team in the research facility, and you have to fight through them to get to the Asari matriarch, Benazia. If you have Liara on your team, there's some unique dialogue as she's forced to slay her own mother. You can also choose to give the Arachni Queen a bath here. Oh wait, it's an acid bath. I'm sure that's good for exfoliation, though. Whether you choose to release or murder the Ragnar Queen, there are no real consequences just yet. In fact, I don't know if there will be any real consequences at all since I haven't finished the other two games. And this is a bit of an issue with some of the major choices you make in this game. Their implications may not be apparent till you play the later installments. Then again, Mass Effect isn't meant to be a self contained experience, so this is by design. After all of this universe rotting, Shepard finally puts everything together and decides to follow Saren to a lost planet known as Elos to locate something called the Conduit. But since the Council doesn't believe them, Shepard is put on house arrest till Captain Anderson has a talk with the human ambassador. Oh wait, he just slaps him. Okay, never mind. Back on the Normandy, Shepard races to Elos to find remnants of the ancient Prothean civilization. A Prothean VI reveals more about the Reapers and the fall of the Protheans. The big twist here is something that legitimately caught me off guard. I had assumed that the Citadel had been built by the Protheans, but as it turns out, the Citadel is actually a mass relay that allows the Reapers to come to the galaxy in the first place, and the Keepers play an integral role in this process. Told you not to trust them. Since the Citadel essentially has all the important information on all the alien races, harvesting this information helps the Reapers enact their mass extinctions. The Protheans altered the signal on the Citadel to prevent the Keepers from sending a message to the Reapers, but the Reapers left Sovereign behind, and it managed to indoctrinate Saren. Now Shepard must return to the Citadel to stop Saren from reactivating the signal. Using the Conduit, a mass relay link to the Citadel, Shepard and his squad reach the Presidium, destroying the Mako in the process. Thank God. Fighting through armies of Geths, Shepard eventually reaches Saren. Here I was able to talk Saren into shooting himself. This went against all my instincts as a psych major, but ultimately didn't have much consequence since Sovereign used Saren and turned him into a ridiculously tough Geth stalker type enemy that I was forced to fight. Outside, a battle between the Sovereign and the Human Alliance forces raged on, with the army being able to defeat the Reaper. After the taxing battle, there is one final decision for Shepard to make. Whether they want Udina or Captain Anderson to be the human representative in the times to come. Another major choice whose consequences won't be seen till later, but it was kind of them to ask me, wonder how the council's doing though. Oh wait, yeah, I killed them. As a whole, I think that Mass Effect weaves an epic James Bond in space tale. The Reapers are terrifying up till the very end. Being able to defeat Sovereign cheapens the Reapers a bit in my opinion. A better ending might have been to somehow counter-engineer the Citadel to send Sovereign back into deep space. The impact of a lot of major choices is also just not apparent. I'm hoping that these choices will hold some weight in the later games. I do have some confidence because I know that some smaller side quests are referenced in Mass Effect 2 at least. I would have liked to see more side questing to the crew because the few that were there were a lot of fun. The crew is probably my favorite part of Mass Effect anyway. They serve as a reminder that the species you're dealing with are more than just whatever preconceived notions you have of them. The problem is, of course, that Liara and Tali are more or less just used to tell you about the distinctive qualities of their races. In fact, all races have defining qualities except humans. Their sole motivation in this title seems to be to get a spot on the council, and even that is mostly only Odina's goal. And honestly, having lived with humans for about 20 years now, I understand the anti-human sentiment rather well. I don't think I need to go into why assigning stereotypes to whole races of people isn't the best idea, but at least the game plays on it by allowing you to recruit what is essentially a gang of misfits. On that note, I don't get how so many people complain of politics in video games when a minority character is so much as mentioned in passing, but not when something like Mass Effect literally draws parallels to real life issues. It's almost like we're afraid of dealing with reality, but are okay with truths being told to us in subversive or sugar-coated ways. I might be onto something here. But wait, video games. Mass Effect has been credited with, or accused of, making the dialogue wheel a mainstay in action RPGs. This sort of streamlined dialogue tree shows you the Cliff's Note version of whatever your character is actually going to say. And as you can imagine, this leads to some misunderstandings. For example, I didn't mean to stab the reporter on the citadel, I just wanted her to back off. Satisfying as it was to watch, I wouldn't have chosen that option had I known Shep was going to smack her senseless. Mass Effect simplifies the decision making process by giving you two broad options: Paragon and Renegade, and a middle neutral option. Using Paragon dialogue choices gives you Paragon points, which unlock more extreme Paragon dialogue choices in certain scenarios, and the same applies to Renegade. And I think that this description of the morality system exemplifies its biggest flaw. Maybe this next sentence will make it even more clear. It's not exactly obvious what Renegade or Paragon means. It's highly situational. Sure, you can generally say that Paragon is morally correct and Renegade is morally dubious, but when Paragon sometimes means that you're a space racist and Renegade often means that you just don't like authority, the lines become blurred, but the morality points don't take this into account. This is less of an issue than it may seem, but that's only because there's a much bigger flaw at play. The Renegade and Paragon choices that are linked to points are often just two different ways of saying the same thing. In the final Saren confrontation, both choices just make Shepard reiterate that Saren is a pawn, and it's just the politeness with which Shep talks to Saren that changes. A lot of the time, your renegade actions will not have the dire consequences that you would expect. This just serves to show you how arbitrary these actions actually are. But since the game has more meaningful choices than in any other non-narrative driven game that I have played before, I can't fault the system that much. This just makes your character less of a contrarian badass shepherd and more of an abuse of authority shepherd. For example, you would think that you would be reprimanded for KOing a reporter, but beyond some announcements in the elevator, it doesn't really hurt your reputation much. After I did that, one woman even asked me if she should get gene therapy for her unborn child. Are you sure you want to put such an important decisions in the hands of a man who potentially has intermittent explosive disorder, woman? But since I'm not the biggest RPG fan, I don't think I'm in the best position to criticize the choices and morality system in any meaningful way beyond what I've already said. But Mass Effect isn't a pure RPG, it's an action RPG, and I am a big action game fan. And you don't even need to have played too many action games to be able to recognize the absolute mediocrity of this game's core combat systems. Right when the game starts, you're made to choose a class. Either you can specialize in tech abilities, which allow you to make quick work of AI enemies or anyone that uses any form of tech, combat abilities, which allow you to be more proficient with guns and basically kamikaze your way through the game, or biotic abilities, which give you a slew of psychic powers. Combinations of these are also possible, but I chose to go down the pure biotic route. Might seem like a bad idea, but you also have squad mates whose abilities can complement your own. That's why Tari, a tech specialist, was a mainstay in my squad. All of this seems interesting, and molding your character to your will adds to the RPG nature of the game. Choosing suitable squad mates adds a tactical layer to the combat, but this layer is basically limited to this choice. Mass Effect is nothing if not ambitious, and the combat systems reflect this. But while the game juggles all of its different hats really well from an RPG and story standpoint, the tactical shooter power based combat doesn't fare quite so well. For one, the shooting just doesn't feel good, particularly early on in the game. Shotguns and sniper rifles are weighty, but pistols and assault rifles feel like pea shooters, while dealing hits that you would expect from these weapon classes. This leads to a weird dissonance in how well you feel the weapons should work and how they actually work. A feeling that is compounded by the laughably low early game shot accuracy that leads to tons of frustration. These things all get better as you build up your skills, but that doesn't ease the early game vexation a bit. Shepard also moves in and out of cover with the movements of a bear that just got out of hibernation, and there's no shooting from behind the cover. Cover that Shepard themselves choose, by the way. And if you ever press R2 to take inaccurate shots from a safe space, you'll just end up taking inaccurate shots while also being as conspicuous as the bear whose movement Shepard imitates. The best strategy is to stay just slightly behind the cover, without using it in the way the game wants. It allows you to get shots out at a higher rate and dodge enemy fire with more ease. An even better strategy that you can use against smaller humanoid enemies is to just rush them and hit them with a melee attack. This throws them to the floor and you can finish them off before they have a chance to get back up. In the final missions, the lack of gravity makes them fly off if you do this, which is hilarious. The gunplay just feels really slow, not because of the movements alone, but also because whenever you want to use an ability, you need to open the ability radial, which pauses the game, select the ability, and then close the radial. Plus, your shields recover when you don't take damage, so you will just have to remain in cover for egregiously long periods of time if your health is low and you don't have any Medigel. This is made even worse by the fact that your guns don't have ammo. No, just like your last PC build, if you use them too much, they overheat, and you need to wait for them to cool down before you can use them again. The second issue is tough to work around, and a lot of cover-based shooters do have a mechanic similar to this where avoiding damage allows you to heal, but the first one is completely avoidable. Instead of having one ability be mapped to R1, why not allow players to have 4 abilities mapped to each of the face buttons of their controllers, accessible by holding R1 and tapping the assigned button? Sure, you would still have to issue orders to your teammates, but pausing to give tactical orders and pausing to use an ability yourself are two different things. One thing that I do like about the combat is how each ability has a separate cooldown. This incentivizes using different abilities while the ones you might otherwise lean on recharge. This isn't without fault either, owing largely to the abilities themselves. While the tech abilities are varied, they are highly situational. Used against organic life forms, they aren't that reliable for causing damage. The biotic abilities fare much better against organics, but Lift and Singularity are more or less similar, differing only in how many enemies you can send to the heavens and for how long. Stasis is my least favorite though, since it also renders an enemy immobile, but it also prevents you from causing any damage to them. Plus, you don't get to watch them transform into helium balloons. I must admit that I'm not particularly well versed in the combat abilities, but I think they might have been more useful to have on ship than any of the other squad mates, since they have very versatile use cases. I could always use guns that don't overheat and a complete immunity to any and all damage, particularly since so many enemies just decide to rush you, potentially one-shotting you on higher difficulties. Quick anecdote before we wrap up this section. I played through the entirety of the game on Insanity difficulty because I thought it was required for the platinum. Turns out, it's not. It wasn't a complete waste of time since it did end up accentuating a lot of the shortcomings of the combat, but you best believe I turned it all the way down to normal when I realized I had been torturing myself for no reason for the entirety of the main campaign. But gunplay is only one part of the equation. The game also gives you ample opportunities to go around and explore the Milky Way galaxy. Unfortunately, this is much less enticing than it may sound. The stories of the side quests make or break the enjoyability of the exploration, because at its core, it is extremely bare bones. You command the Normandy to visit different systems and different clusters through the galaxy map. Then you tap X multiple times to open up a small description of each planet within each system and see if there are any collectibles to be harvested by tapping X once more. Or you can also land on some planets to explore them using the Mako. The Mako. So if the repeated cycle of tapping X was not repetitive enough for you, don't worry, the Mako is here to make things even more tedious. Even in the remaster, this thing still controls like baby's first scrap mechanic project. Instead of contemporary accelerate brake controls, it uses the left analog stick to control forward and backward movement. Not terrible, but not ideal. What is terrible is how you're forced to ride the stupid tank uphill when it's barely even possible to make it go the direction you want on plain terrains. Even the locations you visit in your god-awful vehicle from the deepest circle of hell are copy and paste environments that will be forcing you to take the exact same path over and over and over again, and this is mind-numbingly boring. The enemy variety is also nothing to write home about, although if you did write an email about it, Shepard would probably hack into your account and read it. Actually, I'll give the game some credit. It's much more diverse than I would have expected, but the pace at which it introduces new enemy types makes it feel shallower than it is. The worlds also feel dead. There's little flora and fauna to speak of, and the animals that are there just walk in circles, waiting for you to accidentally run them over with the Mako. It was an accident, I swear. Apart from the identical internal environments, the map of each uncharted planet is also the most square shape, a rectangle. You just walk around in circles, desecrating corpses or interacting with singular objects or killing the Thrasher Maws. One of these things is not like the other. The Thrasher Maws force you to use the Mako as an offensive tool, and yeah, some story missions also require this, but the Thrashers have a ridiculously high damage output and the maneuverability, or lack thereof, of the Mako just isn't adequate for dealing with them. The best tactic I found was to stand in place till the thrashers shot bile at me and then move to avoid it. Even though there are very few thrashers to fight, the sheer tedium of these encounters makes them an absolute chore. But if you toil through all of this, you are rewarded for your efforts with lore and equipment. Tons and tons of equipment. You will spend as much time in menus marking the equipment as trash as you will spend on the battlefield. Once you've decided which weapons you're going to stick to, which will largely depend on the class you belong to, the absolute metric ton of equipment you get will be largely meaningless. There is so little actual variety within weapon classes that the lack of an automated inventory optimization system seems like an egregious oversight. You can't even mark items as trash when you first acquire them. No, you have to open the equipment menu no matter what. So much of my time was spent just finding the weapons with the best stats and marking the rest as trash. The only saving grace are the weapon mods, which have the potential of substantially altering use cases of the weapons, but the game gives too many of the same ones out too frequently. Another gaping omission is that the game doesn't seem to tune the loot to better suit the needs of your party. Even though Tali was a mainstay on my team, I think I got a total of 2 pieces of Korean armor, and I had to purchase those from merchants. While we're on the topic of merchants, the fact that you have to listen to the same few lines of dialogue multiple times over whenever you want to see their wares when they have more than one subcategory in their stores is just silly. Another major issue with exploration and quest completion in this game is how the quest markers are handled. For one, when you complete a quest, the game just leaves the quest marker on the map, which means that to ensure that you interacted with the right thing, you'll have to go to the journal and see if the quest is still listed as active there. Contextualizing completion of quests isn't that hard, but this game misses the mark entirely. Another issue is that quest markers do not show up on the HUD. And I know that many see a lack of objective markers as a paragon of immersion in modern gaming, but I'm a renegade who prefers a clustered HUD to an afternoon spent walking in circles. This issue persists when you're using the Galaxy map, because the locations of specific missions are not marked and you have to open the main menu, open the journal, locate the quest you're trying to follow, and then remember which system the corresponding planet is in. You might say that this was done to increase immersion, but that is a bullshit argument since the locations associated with the main quests are so clearly marked. Allowing players to set one active quest and then marking the relevant location on the Galaxy map would just serve to reduce frustration. The level design as a whole requires you to backtrack very frequently as well. This game definitely shows its age in the gameplay department, and I would highly recommend that you do yourself a favor and play on easier difficulties to reduce the persistent annoyances. The version of the game I played was the PS4 remaster, Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Before I tear this remaster to shreds, I do want to acknowledge that all the textures look absolutely phenomenal, and there are many complaints that I have with this game, such as the tell not show nature of some side quests, or the fact that the game shepherds you through corridor after corridor, or even the bad AI to some extent, that would require a fundamental reworking of the game's systems to add or alter content. However, the same excuse cannot be applied to what appear to be glaring oversights that would require substantially less effort to fix. And even when they would require effort, the effort would have been worth it, as it would make the experience more palatable as a whole. There are a slew of bugs and glitches that I ran into that took me out of the experience constantly. Whether it was the weird camera angles during cutscenes, the fact that a wall appeared out of nowhere when I was exploring and forced me to reload a save, the weird glitch which caused Ashley's lip movements to correspond with Caden's dialogue, which played even though he wasn't on my party, the jittery movements that Shepard would have whenever he walked close to a wall, or the time I got stuck in a door that closed automatically which also forced me to reload a save, or the multiple instances on which I got sniped through a wall. I ran into some technical issue or the other in every single one of my play sessions. Smoothing out bugs is only one part of the problem. If you're selling a remaster of the game that came out over a decade ago, I think that you've had more than enough time to fix some smaller issues to actually remaster the game and not make it as obvious of a cash grab. Case in point, the checkpointing system. Autosave is integrated into the game, but it is very unreliable. This one time, I explored an entire planet before running into a Thrasher Maw and being blown to bits. The game saved none of the progress, and I had to do the same mind-numbingly boring tasks over again. Some small indication for when the map is updated or an objective has been completed could also be added. Another really minor change that would have gone a long way in reducing the hassle associated with a lot of this game's systems would be changing the Simon Says mini games that you have to complete over and over again. It doesn't matter if you're surveying minerals, decrypting logs, or even engaging in necrophilia, you have to play the exact same mini game. Would it really be so hard to have like three different mini games, one for each task, or to just remove the minigame entirely from the item containers to reduce the tedium? What makes this worse is that there are some unique minigames that are only used in one specific context, which could easily have been repurposed for some of these other tasks. In fact, the Simon Says minigame is so all pervasive that it's also used in a high stakes mission where you have to defuse a literal nuke. What better way to tank the stakes than to force me to play a children's game? Even if you fail a bypass, there are no real consequences. You just have to play the same game again. In Kingdoms of Amalur, you are penalized for failing minigames by being inflicted by some or the other status effect. In this game, you can just keep trying over and over till you finally get it. A lot of these issues may not seem like a big deal, and they aren't, but when I saw the cards for each game in the launcher being reflected in the helmet, I thought I could expect that attention of detail in all parts of the remaster. Instead, it just seems like they made a few major changes while overlooking all of the smaller things that needed to be fixed. And this adds up over time to make the remaster feel underbaked, irrespective of how shiny it looks. The last thing I will cover is the DLC. I just want to treat it as the afterthought it was. The Bring Down the Sky mission sets an interesting premise. Terrorists have activated propellers on an asteroid and it is headed towards a human colony. Shepard must deactivate the propellers and come to the aid of some hostages on the asteroid itself. Now, I could mention how you can start this mission and then run off and save the galaxy and then come back, and the asteroid has still not reached its target, but I can't really complain about ludonarrative dissonance in video games because, well, it's a thing. Like I said though, the premise is quite high stakes, even though the plan seems better fit for a despicable me villain. What makes this vignette more interesting is that the terrorists belong to a non-council race that we haven't really had a chance to interact with yet. Don't get your hopes too high though, because the interactions with the Batarians are not very interesting to begin with, and they aren't given any time to properly explain their motivations. I hate to think that people paid real money for such little additional content, but since it's part of the Legendary Edition now, you might as well play it. You won't be missing much if you decide to skip it though. With one of the best stories in all of video game history, an iconic protagonist whose personality you can shape, and with some actually meaningful choices to be made, it's easy to see why the first Mass Effect game is video game royalty. Take your rose-colored glasses off, however, and the deeply flawed gameplay mechanics of the original, only some of which are smoothed out by what is a mediocre remaster at best. And you can see how much of a mixed bag the first entry into the series actually is. But the fact that I, a guy who values gameplay over everything else, sat at the edge of my seat for the 25 hours I spent with this game, reading through codex entry after codex entry to deepen my understanding of the lore of Mass Effect, says something about the quality of the narrative. And so does my readiness to get started with the next title as soon as I possibly can. So that's the end of my Mass Effect 1 review. I tried to divorce the shortcomings of the remaster from those of the main game as much as I could in the script, but I wanted to talk about my experience with the game as I played it in 2022, and there are a lot of things in this first one that just haven't held up to the test of time. The game has a cold open, with the Normandy being torn to shreds in its opening moments. Not only is the vessel that carries you through space destroyed, your more immediate and essential vessel, the one that your being resides in, is also destroyed. That is to say, Shepard dies. Unnecessarily convoluted metaphor out of the way, this is a really strong way to start the game. Having one of the most recognizable characters from your video game franchise meet their end right at the onset of the game is an undeniably memorable way to start the second game of your growing franchise. The second most undeniably memorable thing to do, memorable for the wrong reasons this time, is to revive said character moments later. So Shepard dies after the attack on the Normandy, but their body is pieced together by Cerberus, the human supremacist organization from the first game. I have a lot of problems with this story right off the bat. While working with an organization whose views hopefully don't align with your own is an interesting premise, I'm sure that there could have been a better way of forcing Shepard into this agreement. Maybe, tired of being ignored by the council, Shep starts working with a shady contact who gives them endless resources. Maybe we do a few missions for this shady contact before realizing that they're Cerberus, being forced to work for them because we've already taken too many of their resources and now there's no turning back. Anything would be better than being literally resurrected like the second coming of Christ, returning from techno heaven through vaguely defined machinery. Shepard is treated as the second coming of Christ too. But in the first game, Shep was just a military operative who got in over their head. In this one, they adopt more of a chosen one role. The head of Cerberus, known only as the Elusive Man, revives Shep because he thinks that they have something special that led to Sovereign's demise in the first game. The issue with this? Shepard wasn't alone. In fact, the whole point of the first game was that we worked with aliens from different races, combining efforts and uniting against a common threat. Since the other members of the Normandy crew survived, why wouldn't the elusive man approach them instead? Try to assemble as much of the original team as he possibly could. Why would his first reaction be to literally try to bring somebody back to life? I suppose you could say that it's because, like companies that put up pride flags during Pride Month, his accepting attitude towards aliens is just a front, and he's so pro-human that he thinks that Shepard single-handedly did everything. This still doesn't explain why he wouldn't go to Caden first though. Plus, he has other non-humans as part of his dossiers. Wouldn't it make more sense to just focus on the less dead members of the Normandy's crew? If you're able to get past this really contrived plot, don't worry, it gets even more contrived later on. Never in this obscene a way, but contrived nonetheless. If it feels like I'm hating on the plot too much, it's mostly restricted to this section. I'm not a fan of chosen one narratives or of poorly explained plot devices like literal revivals. I could harp on about this all day. Let's just accept that this is a terrible plot device, take it at its face value, and move on. You wake up from your death-induced coma and start fighting your way through mechs because the Cerberus base you're in has been invaded. The change in combat is immediately noticeable. The guns feel so much better now, and the aiming is more in line with what you would expect. Which is to say, the aiming reticule actually tells you where your bullets will go. The heat sinks that required you to stop shooting to let the guns cool down are also gone, replaced by traditional ammunition which needs to be picked up. The lower explanation for this makes little sense, but I am glad that this change was implemented. It incentivizes aggression. You're shooting at your own terms and you need to go right in your enemy's faces and steal ammo from them. There are a couple of weapon classes which play very differently, but there's little variety within these weapon classes. Another noticeable change is the omission of loot. There is no loot anymore, and you're restricted to certain weapon types with little choice within them, as I just mentioned. And the options that are presented are mostly stronger forms of the weapons you're currently carrying, which makes it a no-brainer to equip the best new thing you've unlocked, basically oversimplifying the already fairly simple system that was in place in the first game. This does also make it less tedious in the process. You no longer have to sift through tons upon tons of meaningless loot. Being able to wield only specific weapon types also makes sense from a class system perspective, but then why retroactively change it in ME1 for the remaster? The lack of loot is striking, and its byproduct is a decreased sense of progression, even more so because of the revamped ability system, which requires more and more ability points the more you invest in abilities. This makes investing in skills more meaningful, but leveling up less so, since you will have to wait a while and go up a few levels before you can acquire the subsequent upgrades. I would have preferred if this game had less loot compared to Mass Effect 1, but loot that was more meaningful instead of having no loot at all. But this change comes across as jarring mostly because of how much loot there was in the previous title. Now, there are some weapons that are distinct from their other counterparts. Heavy weapons in particular change things up depending on the ones you have equipped. You can also find weapon upgrades, which we'll get back to later, and some other random weapons thrown about the battlefield. Another thing that this game lacks is some sort of summary of the main features of a weapon, like its damage output and unique features, presented in an at-a-glance view or something. You have to read through the full descriptions to get a proper picture of how each weapon works, and even then, it's not fully clear what their use cases are. The game also leans more heavily into the third-person shooter trends of the time. Your health now recovers automatically when you stay in cover, making unavoidable damage more acceptable since its effects can now be countered by just hiding behind things. Medigel is now required to use the Unity ability to revive squad mates, and while you can't heal using Medigel anymore, you can utilize class-specific abilities like Barrier or Tech Armor to guard against damage. You also have to press X to get into cover now, meaning that you're more in control of Shepard's actions in combat than you were in the original. This does come at a bit of a cost though, since you might just smack your face into a wall because Shepard decided to take cover while you were trying to run from one place to the next. Another integral part of combat in Mass Effect is the ability system, and I mentioned how squad leveling has been changed already. That's not the only change to abilities though, since all abilities share a common cooldown now. Might seem like a bad idea, but cooldown times are substantially reduced and you can become a total powerhouse, throwing out biotic shockwaves or setting enemies on fire in quick succession. The ability system is slightly more restrictive since there are fewer abilities that each squad member has access to this time around, one of which is locked till you complete their loyalty mission. But this does give each squad member a unique feel in combat. Making the choice of who will be in your squad is more deliberate this time around for more reasons than just the change to abilities though. You can also set up biotic ability synergies if you use compatible skills like pull and throw at the same time to some hilarious effect, made even better by the fact that you can tear the limbs of your enemies clean off. You'll also be playing what is essentially a game of rock, paper, scissors, since different enemy defenses such as armor, shields, barriers, and health have different weaknesses which need to be exploited to effectively deal with them. If you don't tailor your squad to deal with each of these diverse defenses, you will find yourself in a battle of attrition rather than skill. For example, I almost always had Morton on my squad since his Incinerate ability ate through enemy armor in no time. I also kept Miranda with me a lot of the time since no enemy barriers were a match for her heavy warp. That's another thing about the leveling system. Once you reach the final tier of any ability, you can choose between turning the ability into an AoE or increasing its damage output. Again, you will want to make sure to balance your squad out in such a way that you have enough AoE options to deal with crowds, while also having sufficient heavy hitters to take care of the stronger enemies. You do have less control over your squad mates now. You don't decide who they attack, just who they use their powers on. This, and the fact that you can map abilities to different buttons to use them without having to open the ability wheel first, are both efforts to streamline the combat, and each of these additions, or subtractions, come with their own pros and cons. Another example of this streamlining is the leveling system. I swear this is the last time I'll bring it up. For now. The Charm and Intimidate options have been completely removed, and so have passive abilities like Decryption. This takes away from the RPG feel of the game, making it feel more action-oriented. Each squad member also has their own class bonus which can be upgraded, and these upgrades are essentially no-brainers if you want to give your squad a chance to survive. Moving through the Cerberus facility, there was another thing that I realized. The HUD was much busier than it was in the last game. Instead of having a small pop-up tell you that you had earned credits or Paragon or Renegade points, there's a giant tab which shows up to give you this information. It's unnecessary and intrusive, but you will eventually get used to it. Additions to the HUD that I do appreciate are the area maps and objective markers. While in hub worlds like Omega, you'll be given proper area maps, missions provide you with objective markers that you can bring up by pressing the left stick in that show you exactly where to go. This was a glaring omission in the first game, and it's even more important to have something like this in the second one, considering the larger scale of the areas that you go to. This addition is greatly appreciated, and the fact that it's done in such a subtle way is fantastic. There are also subtle indications that your abilities have recharged, and there are even ones for the status of your squad, meaning that you don't have to open the ability radial each time you want to check whether or not you can use one or not. Another complaint I had with Mass Effect 1 was the lack of a proper indication that you had finished your mission. In this game, there's almost always an ending cutscene, indicating that you have finished a quest, and this is followed by a mission complete screen. We'll talk more about how exploration works in this game later on, but the only reason why such a screen even exists is sort of tied to the limited exploration options. I like having a mission summary, but it does make the game feel more linear than it actually is. A complaint that isn't resolved is related to the minigames, the lack of variety in them to be exact. The game does ease it up a little bit. There's two main types of minigames now. One which involves matching patterns and the other one which involves matching symbols. Different, yeah. Once again, they're repeated way too often, and the only other minigame I can think of is a one-off on Tuchanka that has you kill space monkeys. Plus, there's no Omnigel to allow you to bypass these minigames anymore, a fact that Liara and Shepard reference in one of the DLCs. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back on the facility, you come across Jacob. The less said about him, the better. You also eventually meet Miranda, the woman who has been heading the project which sought to bring you back to life. She seems quite stuck up, and she's basically a British Illuminati agent. But I grew to appreciate her character a lot more as the game went on. Wish I could say the same about Jacob though. Anyway, you eventually make your way up the infiltrated base and meet up with the elusive man, who tries to convince you that Cerberus isn't as terrible as it once was. The twisted morality of working with Cerberus makes the plot more tense. You never know if you can fully trust them or even if you would want to, but you are still forced to follow their orders, since the fate of the universe depends on it. The new council still doesn't believe you, and you have no other choice than to use the resources offered to you by Cerberus to try and take down the big bad of this game. All you know about the aforementioned big bad just now is that they're called the Collectors, and that they have been abducting humans from colonies for some unknown reason. To investigate this, you have to take Miranda and a wet blanket to one such colony to find out what happened. The colony is eerily empty, overrun with defense mechs. You come across Tali here, who questions your decision to work with Cerberus. Trust me, Tali, I wouldn't be doing it if I had a choice. You find another Quarian who tells you about the invaders who took everyone away here, and after another meeting with the elusive man, you get access to the new Normandy, which finally opens up the galaxy for you to explore. Just like the last game, you explore the galaxy using the galaxy map aboard the Normandy. Unlike the last game, the galaxy map isn't as much of a frustrating mess anymore. For one, each cluster has a list of missions which you can find in its system listed under it. This makes the map busier, but also makes it so that you don't have to repeatedly quit out of the map to open the journal and then test your short-term memory each time you want to start a certain mission. Moving around the map is also made more interactive, since you're now represented within each system as a small model of the Normandy, which you must freely move around from planet to planet. If you want to move from one system to the other within a cluster, you will need to expend fuel, run out of fuel, and you'll have to use some consumable resources instead. How do you get resources, you ask? Through excessive tedium, of course. Look, I don't think that anybody understands how happy I was when I realized that the Mako had been removed completely. What replaces it isn't an improvement though. Now you go to each planet, get some lore, and then you get to scan these planets for resources or anomalies, which are essentially side missions. You need to slowly rotate the planet using the scanner to find resources which you can then put towards some really valuable upgrades. This whole scanner thing is fun for about the same amount of time as it takes for Shepard to slap a reporter in the face. It's novel the first few times that you do it, but you're expected to do the same thing over and over again. What makes this worse is that the probes that you use to extract resources are themselves a limited resource. There's only one place in each cluster where you can buy these probes. Note that I said cluster and not system. You need to go back to that specific system which contains the fuel depot if you ever run out of probes, before returning to wherever you were when you ran out of the damn things. Again, this isn't as bad as the Mako sections, but it isn't a substantial improvement either. I've debated putting this section after the start of Act 2, but I think it flows better with the discussion about the galaxy map. Exploration in this game is limited to side missions. This is why mission end screens make sense here. The side missions are more linear than they were in the first game, acting as self-contained vignettes instead of galaxy-spanning arcs. On the plus side, the painstakingly boring planetary exploration is gone. These linear missions also have unique layouts and more environmental variety than the side missions in the first game. They are also, unfortunately, less memorable. For most of the N7 quests, you have to come across anomalies on random planets by chance, and once you do, you just have to kill things over and over. Decision making is de-emphasized, and the mission objectives get repetitive and boring real quick. I did exactly 5 unexplored planet missions. No more, no less. This was the exact number that was required to do for one of the trophies. I just could not be bothered to scan so many different planets to be rewarded with more of the same combat encounters repeatedly. The missions on the hub worlds generally fare much better since they allow you to roleplay more. The main story is quite combat heavy on its own, and these missions provide a suitable change of pace. Two side missions stood out to me. The first one involved a Quarian being wrongfully accused of stealing a credit chit by a Volus and an incompetent CSEC officer on the Citadel. This was resolved by me locating the credit chip, helping the Quarian, and then intimidating the Volus and CSEC officers into being less racist. The other had me go to a derelict space station whose AI freaked out and needed to be shut down. Not only does slowly learning about the fate of the humans aboard the ship through datapads and voice notes add a feeling of dread, solving some simple puzzles as you work your way to the AI core adds gameplay variety too. Overall, the side quests are mostly disappointing, but there are some exceptions to the rule. There might have been more interesting plotlines than the ones I just mentioned, but I wasn't willing to trudge through the drivel to just get to them. Mass Effect 2 is a collectathon of people. I know how ridiculous that sounds. How can an RPG be a collectathon? But the game's structure resembles that of a collectathon to a T. There are very few proper main missions which progress the story. These missions must be unlocked by first collecting a specific number of companions whose bios are presented to you by the elusive man in the form of dossiers. You don't need to get all of these companions on your team, but like any good collectathon, Mass Effect 2 incentivizes collecting all the companions. In this game, if you don't get enough squad mates and successfully attain their loyalty, you're going to be at a disadvantage in the final mission. The entire game is building up to the suicide mission, and your proclivities as either a completionist or not determine whether or not this mission lives up to its name. Before we get to the loyalty missions though, we need to start populating the Normandy. Something that I really like about this game is that the more peripheral Normandy crew, like the engineers, have their own unique dialogue trees. It's fun to talk to them, but they don't really get more dialogue later in the game. Another thing about the Normandy that reiterates the squad gathering aspect of the game is how certain sections are blocked off till you recruit the appropriate crew member who will take up residence in that area. Even one of the core progression systems, the upgrade hub, is locked till you recruit Mordin. Before I went to Omega to recruit Mordin in a bid to enable the upgrade hub at the earliest, I made 2 pit stops. The first of these had me go to the original Normandy's crash site. This is a DLC mission which has been seamlessly integrated into the base game. It basically has you pick up a few dog tags while you reminisce about the OG Normandy and its crew. I loved this little send-off to Mass Effect 1, 10 out of 10 DLC should have been a part of the base game to begin with. The second stop was the Citadel. Here, I caught up with Anderson and was denied Spectre status by the new council. I think they were just afraid that if they gave me power, I'd do to them what I did to their predecessors. I've talked about my favorite side quest aboard the Citadel already, but there's one more aspect to it that I need to touch on. The Citadel has been massively scaled down since the first game. Instead of having the liberty to go to the wards and the Presidium areas, you're instead relegated to what is essentially a giant shopping mall. The contrast between the upper class and the lower class on the Citadel isn't a major theme anymore. Well, not as far as gameplay goes. But there is some hilarious commentary on capitalism and advertising which I did appreciate.
Precious metals and jewels, genetic assay data, and virtual intelligences. No credit check, no questions asked. All we need is your citizenship ID. Come down today.
After restraining myself from slapping a reporter across the face for a second time, I made my way to Omega to pick up Mordin. I was hoping to kill 2 birds with one stone here, since a vigilante known only as the Archangel was also on Omega. After landing on Omega, I realized why the Citadel had been so limited. There are 3 main hub areas in Mass Effect 2. The Citadel, naturally, acts like one, but so do Omega and Ilium. Each of these hub areas are also fairly distinct from each other. Omega tackles the seedy underworld themes. Ilium provides a stark contrast as a business hub with its shiny exterior hiding clandestine dealings, and the Citadel focuses mainly on CSEC, but acts somewhat like a middle ground between the two. Back on Omega, we are summoned by the HBIC, an Asari called Arya Talok, and I love everything about her. Learning of her rise as the supreme ruler of this crime-ridden planet is fascinating. One thing that I adore about her character is how she isn't portrayed as being soft at her core. If you help her out, she'll trade favors, but she won't spill her guts to you and tell you her tragic backstory like many other villains would. There's some side quests to do on here. The most interesting one involves getting a bad drink from a bartender and setting him right. But once you're done messing around in the nightclub, you can make your way to either Mordin or the Archangel. Mordin's recruitment mission involves making your way through hordes of enemies to spread the cure of a pandemic which residents of the slums believe humans to have spread. You can also thoroughly traumatize Morden's assistant in the process. When I first met Morden, I fully expected him to fall into the trope of the socially inept savant. Little did I know that he was going to end up becoming my favorite squad mate. Not only is his incinerate ability able to eat through armor like nobody's business, he's also the cutest and funniest being aboard the Normandy. Add to this the moral dilemma about the Krogan genophage and his role in its invention, as well as the fact that he literally sings a song from a musical for you, and it's hard to beat the charm of this lovable Silurian ally. The other recruitment mission is that of the Archangel, the sharpshooter vigilante who's united all the factions of the galaxy because of how many of each of their recruits he has killed. The factions themselves don't play a substantial role in the story. Your interactions with them are limited to shooting each of their members in the face, no question asked. But the fact that they're working together to take him out shows just how prolific of a killer he is. You can make the ending section of this mission easier for yourself by sabotaging the factions, a nice little touch. Once you're done doing that, you can shoot through the faction members who are trying to get to the Archangel and finally unmask him. And the Archangel is handsome boy Garrus, and he's back with a butt shot. I've heard people say that it's contrived that you would run into your old squad mates all the time, but honestly, it makes perfect sense that the Normandy's original crew would go on to take up some of the most important positions in the galaxy. Garrus's recruitment mission is basically a tower defense game which ends in a fight against a gunship boss, a fight which is repeated a total of 3 times in this game. The mission ends with Garrus getting an injury to his face, but the scars only make him more perfect if you ask me. Another little thing that the game does that goes a long way is that it puts you back on the Normandy when you finish a mission, reducing backtracking in the process. Also, I know that I've been thirsting for Garrus a lot, but his character in this game is severely nerfed. He frequently doesn't want to talk to Shepard, and I wish that he had more stories from his days as a vigilante to share. The initial banter with him when you get back on the Normandy is delightful though. Now that we have unlocked the research terminal, I suppose it's time to talk about the equipment side of progression. There are a few different categories of upgrades that you can find, which require you to pick up schematics from stores or through exploring the areas that missions take place in. You must then use resources to implement these upgrades. Most of these upgrades are simple stat boosts to your weapons or armor, or to your squad's weapons or armor, but there are some prototypes which unlock all new weapons or unique armor sets. The weapons that you can unlock through this are mostly heavy weapons though. There are quite a few armor sets however, and they not only look badass but also give you certain stat boosts. You can also acquire individual armor pieces and mix and match to create your own set. This also allows you to make your armor hot pink and makes kissing people less awkward since you won't be doing it through a helmet, but I personally just stuck to one of the presets. Sorry Liara, I hope you like the taste of glass. There's another additional upgrade type, the Normandy upgrades. These don't usually have any direct gameplay benefit, but you'll still want to implement all Normandy upgrades that your engineer class crewmates recommend, since these play a role in the suicide mission as well. There's 2 more crewmates for us to pick up before the next story beat. The first of these is Jack, a biotic psychopath who's behind bars on a space station. Aboard this interstellar prison was where I realized just how cinematic this game truly was. Sweeping camera angles give you a picture of the sheer scale of this prison, but its warden tells you all about it. He then decides to try and trap you in one of the stupidest plot twists in this game, and you have to fight your way out of the prison. I believe that this is also where I realized that the pyro enemies are completely broken. Get caught in their flamethrower blasts and you'll be stun-locked to death. On your way out of the prison, Jack will decide to join your team. Right off the bat, you can tell that her main focus is survival. The game does a good job of characterizing each of its characters, and Jack is no exception. Done wrong, Jack would have big, not like other girls, or non-binary stereotype energy. And while I don't think that she falls into either of these camps, there are some issues with her quest line which I'll discuss when we talk about her loyalty mission. With that, we are off to recruit our final crewmate for now. To complete this task, we have to go to the Krogan homeworld of Tuchanka, where we end up acquiring a Krogan in a giant test tube. We can decide to keep the Krogan locked up in that test tube if we want, but he's funny enough to warrant his release from his cylindrical prison. Grunt isn't my favorite squad mate because of how one-dimensional his character is, but there's no denying the hilarity in his ceaseless aggression. Once you have collected enough people, the galaxy map gets logged and you're forced to land on the human colony of Horizon, which is midway through a mass abduction. You get to fight through waves of collectors. Their insect-like appearance makes me extremely uncomfortable, but they're fairly standard enemies. Occasionally, one of them will be possessed by the Harbinger and become stronger. There are also these Scions whose poorly telegraphed attacks take your shield out in one hit. Make your way through these enemies and you'll be greeted by Caden, who doesn't want to work with you because you're associated with Cerberus. This immediately gives him more characterization than any of his actions during the first game, but it also makes him more annoying. Bold of him to assume that I'd want him on my team anyway. With that, it's time to complete the roster of teammates for this game. I'll be talking about the respective loyalty missions of each member of your team when I talk about the recruitment missions, since at this point, there's little delay between recruiting them and unlocking those loyalty missions. The first of these that I tackled was Kasumi's. Kasumi is a DLC character, a fact that's apparent from the lack of a proper recruitment mission. As a master thief though, she's a really fun character to have on the team, and her loyalty mission has you go to a rich guy's mansion to steal something from him. I enjoyed the initial part of this mission, where you get to roleplay as James Bond, sneaking around the opulent house of this man, trying to disable the security systems. The mission lacks any semblance of depth though, since it basically does all the hard work for you. It's very on rails and it ends in a combat section, which there's no way to avoid. Imagine how much better this mission would be, where if you did things just right, you could steal the items from right under the guy's nose without him ever knowing that you were even there. A failure to do things right could still result in combat, but the loyalty mission of a master thief shouldn't force you to fight your way to the treasure. The story of Kasumi's loss is heartfelt though, but since you can't properly interact with her once this mission is over, you don't get to see the full ramifications of letting go of the ghost of her past lover. The setup of this mission is my favorite one, but it so massively drops the ball when it comes to execution. Samara's loyalty mission provides a glimpse into what this mission should have been. The second loyalty mission I attempted was Saeed's. I don't particularly like Saeed. I think he's just a boring mercenary, and his revenge-oriented loyalty mission didn't tickle my fancy either. There's interesting use of environmental hazards to take out large groups of enemies here, but story-wise, there's little of interest. This mission did point out the lethal flaw of this game's loyalty system though. I decided that the lives of the innocent workers were more important than Zaid's thirst for revenge, and I expected this to result in me losing his loyalty. Instead, the squad screen showed that I did somehow gain his loyalty, despite his very apparent anger at my decision. Loyalty is tied almost exclusively to loyalty missions, and very few of these loyalty missions have fail states. Out of the 4 that do, 3 of these fail states are triggered depending on the decisions that you make, and the last one depends on your ability to follow a target. Out of the 3 that are decision dependent, 2 do not require you to make any sort of difficult decision if you have a high enough Paragon or Renegade rating. See, in Zaid's quest, I was able to talk him into being loyal by using my high Paragon score to persuade him. In Tali's quest, a similar situation arose where I was forced to make a difficult decision, but since I had a high enough Renegade rating, I chose to take the easy way out. I hate that this is an option at all, and this isn't even the only situation in which having a sufficient Paragon or Renegade score can get you out of trouble. After you complete the loyalty quests of certain pairs of crew members, they'll end up getting in a fight. Choosing one will result in you losing the loyalty of the other, but using the Paragon or Renegade options will result in the end of the infighting, and you'll retain the loyalty of both members. And even if you do choose between them, it's still possible to use the same skill check to win back the loyalty of the member you upset. How did we go from being forced to decide between which crew member lives and dies in the first game, to having 2 options which basically act as a I don't want to decide button? There should be fail states for each loyalty quest, and even for some recruitment quests. The decision of which squad mate you back should be a difficult one. There should be a neutral option independent of your Paragon and Renegade points, but losing the loyalty of your team shouldn't be as difficult as it is. The binary morality system just does not work for this game, since you're literally in a morally grey area right from the start, considering that you're allying yourself with a human terrorist group. The Paragon and Renegade conversation options can never seem to make up their mind on whether a Paragon would bow to authority or oppose human supremacists, and having skill checks tied to how many of each individual type of points you have makes zero sense as a result. What further complicates things is the QTE interrupt system, which doesn't even tell you what ship is going to do, just that it will be a Paragon or a Renegade action. Sometimes it's easy to tell what's going to happen from the context clues. Other times, though, it absolutely isn't, and it oversimplifies the already oversimplified system. God, it makes such little sense. Your face also changes and makes you look more like a sci-fi demon if you stray too far on the renegade path. This makes absolutely zero sense, but I think it looks cool and the effect can be reversed, so it's probably the only acceptable part of this morality system. This last complaint isn't exactly about the Paragon Renegade mechanics, but it is about the dialogue wheel, so I'll mention it here. Pressing square skips dialogue lines, but it also results in selection of a dialogue option. This means that you'll sometimes be pressing square repeatedly and select a dialogue option by mistake. This could be fixed so easily. Just make it so that selection of a dialogue choice is restricted to pressing X. My primary frustration with the game lies mostly in how poorly the morality system is handled. In the first one, it made little sense. In this one, it actively hinders the player's experience by not allowing them to fully engage with the role-playing side of things. But that's enough about the deplorable dialogue wheel. Let's get back to the loyalty missions. Jack's mission sees you destroy the Cerberus facility where she was held and tortured as a kid to harness her biotic potential. Like I said, Jack doesn't fit into the not like other girls trope, but she does fit into the broken psychopath who the universe wronged one. Her crime stories are fantastic, though, and there is something cathartic about destroying the Cerberus base. I will say that I might have taught Jack the same murderous lesson that I taught Garrus in the first game, but come on, that guy deserved it. There was something that I didn't like about how Jack's character is handled. After a certain point, despite me making it extremely clear that I wasn't romantically interested in her, she got offended that I was hooking up with Miranda and refused to talk to me because of this. I don't know if I made some wrong dialogue choices that led to this, but I think I made it very clear that I just cared for her as a friend, and it still resulted in me being shunned from her place in the engineering hold. Morden's loyalty mission is nothing special, but it does force him to confront the moral implications of launching a literal genophage on a species. Grant's loyalty mission also takes place on Tuchanka, and it involves him going through a Krogan coming of age ceremony. You get to fight a Thresher more, but this throwback is about the most interesting part of this mission. You can also run into Rex on Tuchanka, but he refuses to join your team because he's too busy saving his species or something. So self-absorbed. Jacob's mission sees you finding his father, who has been presumed dead. If you thought Jacob was bad, which he is, God, Jacob, stop being such a suck-up. His father is significantly worse. He made use of the debilitating health of his stranded crew members to essentially enslave them. I ended up giving Jacob Sr. the choice to take his own life before the authorities arrived, which he promptly did. The mission itself was fine, but Jacob is Caden Alenko levels of annoying, with the difference being that Caden at least had an interesting backstory in the first one. For Miranda's loyalty mission, we have to go to Ilium. There's quite a few points of interest here. You can help out the people of the zoo's Hope Colony and get a small message from the Rachni Queen as well. You also run into Liara, who we'll be talking about more in the DLC section. Miranda's mission involves saving her twin sister. Miranda was genetically synthesized by her father to be perfect, and she wanted her sister to have a better life than she did, so she helped her escape from the man. Her sister's cover is nearly blown, and Miranda must make sure that her father doesn't find her. I love Miranda's arc. She initially comes across as a hard ass, but you get to see her more vulnerable side in a way that feels organic. I do find it hard to believe that Miranda would trust anyone but herself to transport her sister, but the final interaction between her and her sister makes the plot inconsistencies worth it. On Ilium, we can also find Samara and Thane. Samara is an Asari Justicar. Her strong moral code makes her intimidating, but it's her biotic prowess that makes her fearsome. I alluded to her loyalty quest being exceptionally good. This is because, unlike most loyalty quests which just turn into combat gauntlets, hers involves gathering intel on her daughter, an Asari Black Widow, and has you acting in a certain way to lure her out so that Samara can end her once and for all. Not only is learning about the enigmatic Ardat Yakshi and Asari Justicars enriching in and of itself, the way that the quest forces you to use the dialogue wheel in a creative way to get what you want adds a new layer to the gameplay that I wish was explored more elsewhere. You can also choose Samara's daughter over Samara and recruit her instead, but you'd be missing out on Reeve, the best ability in the game. Not only does it sap enemies' health like nobody's business, it also restores a chunk of your own. This was the ability that I gave to Shepard through advanced training, and it made a lot of missions towards the end a breeze. The other companion you can recruit here is Thane, an assassin with a moral compass. Thane is a Drell, an alien race which we haven't come across before. Although his spirituality can come across as a bit heavy handed and even hypocritical, owing to his job as an assassin, it's still great to learn more about this new race and their unique memory system. And I mean, it doesn't hurt to have a benevolent assassin on the team, but can he please stop turning into the Riddler? His quest involves stopping his son from following in his footsteps, because Thane is that father who went to get milk and never came back. I like that the father-son issues aren't resolved through a single conversation, but Thane's mission is very boring gameplay-wise and just has you running around the citadel. Between Thane and Jacob, though, we have the full experience of messed up father-son dynamics. Speaking of people you want to call daddy, Garrus's loyalty quest involves taking revenge on the guy who sold his vigilante group out to the factions. Once again, this resulted in me reinforcing the message that murder is good, but I'm glad that I could help the handsome boy out in some way. The final crewmate left to pick up is Tali. I loved Tali in the first game, and this one improves her character even more. After you help her on a planet with a very ambitious sun, which is also overrun by Geths, she decides to join your team. Her loyalty quest takes you to the Quarian flotilla. The concept of this migrant fleet piqued my curiosity in the first game, and watching it in action while taking part in its politics in this one delivers on that setup. The subplot about the Geth Quarian fight for the Quarian's native planet is something I'm hoping to learn more about in the next game too. Fighting through a ship to learn the truth behind Tali's father's death makes for an exemplary plot, but the fact that you can just scream at the politicians to forgive Tali without having to make the tough decision of presenting or concealing the truth about her father's experiment is a major letdown. Progressing the main quest doesn't require you to complete loyalty missions or even resolve all dossiers for that matter, so once you're ready, you can board the seemingly abandoned collector ship. Here, Shep gets access to one more weapon class. The ship resembles a hive and it's very disconcerting. To nobody's shock, the ship was not abandoned and this was indeed a trap. Now you must fight your way past the collectors to return to Normandy. You do learn that the collectors are an evolved, indoctrinated form of the Protheans, a twist that caught me completely off guard. Anyway, return to the Normandy and you can trigger the final act of the game by initiating the mission to acquire the Reaper IFF. The Reaper IFF mission is possibly my least favorite in the entire game. You just fight your way through hordes of husks, trying to get to the IFF. A Geth, donning part of the N7 armor, appears to be helping you as you make your way through the deactivated Reaper, but you'll have to wait till after you have obtained the IFF to properly interact with them. By this point, I had seen everything that the game's combat had to offer, so being forced into combat with so many enemies was an annoyance more than anything. Even the final boss of this area is a slog. You shoot at the Reaper's core as it just takes your abuse. Fire enough shots and the core will stop taking damage and you'll be forced to fight yet more husks who can stun lock you if you're not careful. The only good thing to come from this mission is Legion. Legion is the most unique crew member of them all. As a member of the Geth Collective, he provides answers to questions you probably didn't even know you had about how the Geth hive mind works. Even his loyalty quest focuses on the collective intelligence of the Geths. There's a group of defaulters, Geth heretics, whom you must take down. You can choose to override their intelligence, essentially taking away their free will, but the only other alternative is blowing their entire ship up. I like this moral dilemma and Tali's own perspective on it, and while I'm still left with many questions about the Geth and about Legion's functioning, I appreciate being given a new perspective on the sentient AI race that I spent the entirety of the first game fighting. Between Legion and Tali's respective loyalty missions, we have more perspectives on the Geth debate than we could have ever hoped to have in the first game. I won't say that these perspectives humanize the Geths, far from it, but the idea of eradicating them entirely feels much more sinister now than it did in the first game, where they were mostly treated like machines, unless you completed some specific side quests which gave them more character, that is. With that, it's time to use the Omega 4 relay and take out the collector threat once and for all. Before we do that, we need the IFF to be installed. Completing any mission and then interacting with the galaxy map triggers a pseudo point of no return. Your entire squad leaves the Normandy for some reason, and when you return, it turns out that the collectors have abducted the rest of the crew. It's a bit heavy-handed. I mean, why did the entire squad decide to leave when you usually just choose 2 members to come with you and leave the rest behind? But it allows for a pretty tense sequence to play out and an equally tense timer to be activated. You can do other missions, but your crew members will die if you don't proceed to the actual point of no return, the Omega 4 relay. And with that, it's time to talk about the most interesting and potentially most flawed part of the game, the suicide mission. But first, an awkward sex scene with Miranda. Once you're done fornicating, Joker takes the ship through the relay and to the collector base. This is where doing loyalty missions pays off. You need to make decisions about which members of your team you're going to assign to different tasks. For example, you need a tech specialist right when the mission begins, and later you'll need to select a biotics expert to hold up a barrier. While the choice of which companion to assign to each task is generally glaringly obvious, with one exception that I'll mention in just a moment, the survival of said companions or their teams that they're a part of depends on whether or not you have their loyalty, as well as some Normandy upgrades. There's a base defense score that each teammate has, which, along with their loyalty status, determines their fate. The loyalty system is lacking for reasons I've already laid out, but in the context of the suicide mission, there were a lot of different metrics which should have been implemented to measure the survivability of your squad. For one, the amount of time or number of missions that each member spends on your party should have been taken into consideration. Specific weapon or prototype upgrades for squad members should also have played a role. I do recognize that such systems would take a lot of time and resources to implement, but as it stands, completionists are rewarded for doing the loyalty missions and getting upgrades, and meaningful decision making and having actual interactions with your squad are de-emphasized. Nothing exemplifies this better than the exception that I mentioned earlier. You have to decide on a fireteam leader. Initially, Miranda seems like the obvious choice. She was leading the Cerberus operatives who brought you back to life after all. But when it comes to making the choice, Jack very blatantly states that she opposes Miranda's leadership. If you choose to disregard Jack's objection and instate Miranda as the lead anyway, there are absolutely no consequences. I refuse to believe that the hot-headed Jack wouldn't disobey Miranda and potentially get herself killed in the process. Maybe this would make more sense if there was any indication that resolving the dispute between Miranda and Jack earlier had affected their relationship, but that's just not the case. Listening to your teammates doesn't seem to matter that much in the suicide mission. It's a missed opportunity, and while I love how unique this whole setup is, there's no denying that it's also extremely underwhelming in its execution. The resolution of the plot itself isn't without fault either. As you fight your way through the character base in what is admittedly an interesting arena, you finally discover the reason behind the abductions. And it is, well, it's kind of funny if you ask me. The collectors have been turning people into... There's no good way to say this. They were turning the abducted humans into genetic puree so that they could inject what they believed to be the essence of humanity in the form of chromosomal fluids, not that kind, into a giant human-shaped reaper. This is the most complicated form of IVF I have ever seen. It feels like the more we learn about the reapers, the less intimidating they get. This whole human reaper reveal literally feels like a bad Scooby-Doo unmasking. You get to engage in battle with the human reaper. The more I say the name, the more it sounds like a bad heavy metal band. What were they even thinking? This boss fight is not the worst that the series has to offer. You alternate between shooting the human sorbet injecting tubes, waves of collectors, and Ennard himself till eventually you're defeated and get to make one final decision, whether or not you want to destroy the collector base. I decided to leave the base in Cerberus's hands. I might not like Cerberus, but letting all of this stuff go to waste seemed like a terrible idea. Once this was done, Shepard returned to Normandy for one last victory lap. Or they could also die, because apparently Shep can die twice in the same game and still come back for the sequel. I'll keep this part brief since I've already described most of my complaints with how the loyalty system and suicide mission were handled. The beginning and ending of the plot are both incredibly weak, and we do little to impede the Reaper threat in the grand scheme of things. As a self-contained story, Mass Effect 2 fares well, if you're fine with the emphasis on its characters, that is. The story structure revolves entirely around the squad, and if you don't care for interacting with them and learning more about them, I don't see you deriving any sort of fun from this game. Mercifully, the characters are all multi-dimensional and their stories are truly engaging. The morality of pledging allegiance to Cerberus also adds to the tension, but there are quite a few contrivances which some people will be more sensitive to than others. We still have one more thing to talk about before we wrap it up though. An aspect of the game that felt like an afterthought in the first one. An aspect that feels like anything but in this one. We still have to talk about Mass Effect 2's DLC. Apart from the return to the Normandy mission that I've talked about, and some DLC armors and weapons, there are three main DLC packs. The first of these introduces a Mako-like vehicle that fares much better than that stupid drone. I didn't do every single mission of the Firewalker pack because it felt like tagged on content for the sake of content, and the Hammerhead itself makes an appearance in a more capable DLC pack, Project Overlord. Project Overlord leans heavily into the sci-fi genre. You're forced to navigate some endlessly creepy Cerberus labs where they've been attempting to interface with the Geth network to gain control over them. After going through some sections straight out of a horror movie, you discover that the autistic brother of the head researcher had been tortured physically and mentally. You can rescue the boy and send him off to live with the X-Men. This DLC was fantastic across the board. The Hammerhead is much less aggravating to control than the Mako could ever hope to be, and its use in platforming sections provides a nice change of pace from the combat that you engage in some truly horrifying environments. And although having no dialogue lines for your companions is extremely uncanny, I highly recommend playing through this vignette nonetheless. The layer of the Shadow Broker pack is also excellent. It introduces a tech noir theme and gives you a deeper insight into what exactly happened to Liara in the 2 years that you were gone for. Considering how long the Asari lived though, 2 years is not a lot of time, and the radical change in Liara's character from naive scientist to cold hard information broker is kinda contrived. Still, you do get to see her take up the post of the Shadow Broker, which is a fantastic resolution for her arc. You can also continue her romance on the Shadow Broker base. Also on the base, you gain access to hilarious video files as well as more information on your crewmates. Information that ranges from lighter stuff like Miranda's failed attempt to find a date through a matchmaking site to darker topics like Samara's last transmission with her children before she took up the mantle of Justicar. There is also some gameplay variety introduced in the form of a terrible flying car that pretty much drives itself, but overall, this DLC is an essential part of the Mass Effect 2 experience. I love Mass Effect 2, but even I can't deny that this game is deeply flawed. The story structure aside, it feels like they tried to improve on the gameplay from the first game, but the result was like slapping a band-aid on a knife wound. Scratch that. A more appropriate analogy would be stitching up a knife wound with an unsterilized needle. They closed the wound, but in doing so, they infected the game with a slew of other problems. The removal of the loot system, for instance, fixes the issue of Mass Effect 1's endless bombardment of the player with meaningless weapons and armor items, but it also reduces player customization. One thing that I do need to praise the game for is how self-referential it can be, both in the literal making references to plotlines from the last game and tying up loose ends way, but also in the humorous "we know you hated this so we changed it" way. Going into Mass Effect 3, I do feel a sense of anxiety over whether or not the overarching plot of the Reaper threat will be satisfactorily resolved, but I know that I'll always keep the Normandy SR2 screw close to my heart. This video is difficult for me to make. Not just because of the real world stuff that's going on as I write the script. No, the reason why I even made this channel was as a form of escapism. What makes this script hard to write is the fact that I can't decide how I feel about Mass Effect 3. Over the approximately 75 hours I have spent with Shepard and the various iterations of the Normandy and its crew, I have formed a bond with them that is unlike any I have formed with any characters in any game prior. That's why it's hard for me to decide if I'm perceiving the resolution of this epic story poorly because of this bond, or if my negativity stems from the plot itself being inherently flawed. This video will not only be a critical analysis of what is one of the most divisive titles in video game history, but it will also be a way for me to, hopefully, figure out where exactly I fall on the spectrum of people who hate or love this game. Although to be fair, I don't think that it's a spectrum at all so much as it is a staunch binary position that one must take. Instead of following the structure of either of the two videos I have made on this series thus far, I'll present my views on the gameplay first, and then take you through the plot, disassembling every significant aspect of it and putting it under the microscope wherever I see fit. So, without further ado, let's start an analysis of Mass Effect 3 with what is, perhaps, its least interesting part, its gameplay. When I say that the gameplay is the least interesting part of Mass Effect 3, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. See, almost every single aspect of the game's story has been a point of contention since its release. But from what I can tell, the gameplay is more or less unanimously praised across the board. This praise isn't undeserved either. BioWare really did all that they could to improve on the gunplay from the past two games, making it more fluid and cohesive than ever before, giving it a unique feel while still retaining the best parts of the games that came prior. First off, you can run infinitely now. This makes traversing environments much faster. Traversal has also been given a greater aspect of verticality. You can climb up ladders, jump across gaps, and vault over smaller objects. The traversal sections, one of which is a fairly long chase, are almost always scripted, but since moving in and out of cover and changing cover has also been made more fluid, the changes to movement do bleed into the moment to moment gameplay as well. The issue is that running, taking cover, interacting with ladders, interacting with objects, and vaulting over objects are all mapped to X, which makes for some truly aggravating moments. In particular, I can think of three instances where I was trying to interact with an object to complete an objective, or just trying to pick up a heavy weapon, but Shepard would instead hide behind cover, vault over it, or just run around in circles as I tried to avoid fire. In one of the final missions of the game, a seemingly endless amount of enemies were thrown at me as I was directed to interact with something to finish that section. I died so many times simply because getting Shepard to the object was a dreadful task, considering how many obstacles there were along the way that just forced him into cover. Even after I got to the thing I was supposed to interact with, Shepard just refused to end my misery and just press a damn button, opting instead to do squats like he was James Vega on leg day. The situation was aggravating, and the only remedy was to preemptively stand close to the object in question, hiding directly opposite it to make sure I would be in the best possible place to interact with it as soon as the game needed me to. This wouldn't have been so bad were it not for some of the enemy designs in the game. In a cover-based shooter such as this, it makes perfect sense to have enemies that shoot at you rapidly, confining you to your place of respite as you meticulously whittle away at their healths. But in this game, there are a lot of enemy types like the Harvesters, Geth Rocket Troopers, and the Destroyers who have extremely little downtime between their attacks. These enemies are just annoying to fight, particularly since the enemy AI is improved across the board now, and other enemies will rush you, displacing you from your preferred cover, as you're endlessly bombarded by projectiles that have the potential to stunlock you to death. Oh, and don't even get me started on the ridiculously overpowered turrets that Cerberus engineers can lay down multiples of. Speaking of Cerberus, a very large part of the game involves you fighting waves upon waves of Cerberus operatives. This gets exhausting. The game has decent enemy variety, but dispensing enemy types at a steady pace to maintain novelty has been an issue from the inception of the series, and nowhere is this more apparent than in Mass Effect 3. What makes Cerberus enemies that bit more annoying to fight is that a lot of them just randomly cause dust clouds to appear, which prevent you from targeting them. I get that it is supposed to incentivize aggression, but dear god does their ability to turn any battle into one fought in a sandstorm frustrating. Let's move away from the enemy types and focus on the gunplay and powers now. There are a variety of guns this time around, in stark contrast to Mass Effect 2, which dropped the loot system. Mass Effect 3 sets up an interesting compromise between the excessive loot of Mass Effect 1 and the shallow variety of Mass Effect 2 by providing players with weapons and armor pieces which can be picked up like loot from the first game, but which are as meaningful, if not more, than the weapons Mass Effect 2 equipped Shepard with. To further promote player choice, weapons are no longer class locked. Instead, an equip load system is put into effect, wherein if you exceed your carry capacity by equipping Shep with too many classes of weapons, the recharge speed of your powers decreases, but if you stick to only one or two weapon classes, the recharge speed improves. I love this system. It opens up avenues of player experimentation even more than the remastered version of Mass Effect 1, which allowed you to carry all weapon classes at all times. Since now, you can decide whether or not you are willing to trade off a shorter recharge time for your powers for more raw firepower. Weapon mods make the system even deeper as they allow you to min-max the weapon to your liking. Don't want to be dragging along the giant sniper rifle? Equip it with ultralight materials. Such choices add to the role-playing aspect of the game greatly, something that Mass Effect 2 seemed to be detracting from. There is a glaring oversight though. When you're purchasing a weapon in store, you can't see its attributes in relation to what you have currently equipped, making the decision of purchasing a particular weapon feel like complete guesswork. It's like one of those Amazon mystery boxes. You know how much you spent, but you have to wait till after you spent that amount to see if the investment was worth it. The lack of class specific weapon benefits does seem odd, though, till you consider the fact that each weapon can be upgraded a total of 5 times at the cost of credits. So, instead of investing skill points to make your weapon proficiency better, you instead have to choose which weapon is worth investing credits into. Not a perfect system, but I personally prefer it to class benefits. The more weapon-oriented classes do also have class benefits which increase weapon damage across the board and increase carry capacity as well, so your starting class does play a role in how good you are with guns. As always, I decided to make my character more biotics oriented, so I simply carried a heavy pistol and a sniper rifle and relied more on my biotic prowess, as well as the abilities of my companions. The power and leveling system has been revamped significantly. Shepard has access to more powers than last time, and each power or class ability has 6 tiers of upgrades. The first 3 of these are going to be the same for everyone, but the other 3 are presented as binary choices, each of which offers a different benefit. You can choose the upgrade that better suits your playstyle and party. You can choose to opt for raw damage, a greater recharge speed, or a wider area of effect. It's similar to how the last game made you choose between 2 alternatives whenever you reach the final tier of upgrades for a specific ability, but here you have to make that choice 3 times over. This really allows you to mold Shepard how you see fit. Through interactions with team members, you can also unlock some special abilities to equip to Shep that would be otherwise inaccessible. The one that I chose was Energy Drain, which allowed me to sap enemy shields and use them to increase my own. This ability was endlessly useful, particularly towards the end of the game. What made Energy Drain even more fun to use was the fact that I could use it in conjunction with ED's Incinerate ability to set off tech detonations. In the last game, using 2 complementary biotic powers would lead to special effects, and in this one, this system has been extended to tech powers. It's still hilarious to see enemies fly off into outer space when you combine lift and throw, but allowing engineers to set up tech synergies is undoubtedly a good decision. My main problem with combat in this game is that the developers seem to think that it was much more engaging than it ended up being. Combat encounters are sometimes stretched out for truly egregious amounts of time, and they get mind-numbingly boring when you have to fight the same few enemy types over and over as you make your way through a relatively unengaging environment, particularly since there's no puzzles to provide gameplay variety anymore. There's one thing that I haven't mentioned, something that those who have played the previous games or watched literally any videos about them will know all too well. Mini-games have been entirely removed. It's a change that makes sense. Those games were tedious as all hell to complete over and over again, but I would be lying if I said I didn't miss them. They had a certain charm to them that the turret sections of this game, which are the closest things to mini games in this one, just can't match. From what I've said about the combat and leveling system, it may seem like RPG mechanics have been improved upon across the board. The truth is that the change is more neutral than the combat improvements may let on, which is ironic because the neutral option in conversations has been eradicated. Not only is there no charm or intimidate skill to push Shep into being a better conversationalist, one of the 3 options that you usually had in conversations in previous games has been eliminated, making all decisions black or white. This has the opposite effect of what I think was intended, since it makes the Renegade and Paragon options virtually indistinct in a lot of situations, instead of increasing the divide between them. This change is also baffling when examined in conjunction with the vastly improved reputation system. While in previous games Paragon and Renegade checks were dependent on your past Renegade or Paragon actions, in this one you instead have a singular reputation bar which fills up as you make decisions in general and interact with NPCs or help them out. This reputation bar is used for reputation checks instead of your relative Paragon and Renegade score, which allows you to change your moral alignment to fit the situation, provided you have enough reputation points to begin with. This is a welcome change, since the morality system was always arbitrary to begin with, and being forced to make your present decisions dependent on your past choices leaning towards a specific alignment made little sense. Vestiges of the old system are apparent in the Renegade and Paragon interrupts though, and they're even more opaque than they were in the last game. Sometimes I would press L2 to engage with the Paragon QTE, hoping that it would make Shepard support a teammate in an argument, and he would instead give them a moral lesson that I personally didn't believe in. I don't know who thought it would be a good idea to bring the system over into this game, but I would recommend performing all Renegade interrupts, since Shepard does some truly outrageous things at times. There's one last thing to discuss before we get into the plot. The galaxy map has been altered drastically. Like in the last game, the Normandy appears as a small model that you can control. Unlike the last game, you don't need to spend ages scanning planets for resources. Planet scanning is still a thing, but now you only need to launch one probe to collect items on certain planets. You do need to scan the entire system by sending out pulses from the Normandy to first discover which planets need to be probed. Since the Reaper invasion is in full swing in this game, sending out pulses slowly alerts the Reapers to your presence. Scan enough times and the Reapers will start to close in on you, and you'll need to leave the system to escape them. This makes the galaxy feel more hostile than before and adds to the wartime feel of the game, or it would if it didn't make the Reapers seem incredibly dumb. If you leave a system and immediately re-enter it, the Reapers will also have to enter the system again before they continue chasing you down. You can exit and immediately re-enter a system multiple times, and they won't ever think to just stay there and wait for you. What makes this more viable is the fact that the Reapers, the most formidable foe in the entire universe, will just politely wait for you as you scan planets. Choosing the Reapers in this way is your best bet for getting all the resources in the system too, since the only other way of decreasing heat in any system is to complete a mission. It's a strange gameplay decision. The devs are basically saying go and do other things and then come back if you want everything that you just scanned the system for. It's tedious and it doesn't promote any sort of creative problem solving beyond pressing X multiple times, hoping that the game would place the Normandy close to the resource you're trying to extract. This system could be made more engaging if you could set lures for the Reapers across each cluster to give yourself adequate time to scan each system. But as it's done here, it's just a game of pure luck with a dash of tedium mixed in for good measure. Mass Effect 3 is dark. No, I mean, literally. It's aesthetically a much darker game than the first two. It looks like someone turned the contrast all the way up in post, and I honestly prefer the visuals of the second game to the third one. Tonally, though, this aesthetic matches the plot of the game. The galaxy is at war with the Reapers, and the galaxy is losing. You start off on Earth, right as the Reaper invasion of the planet begins. Shepard is now back with the Alliance, since Cerberus is magically evil once again, and we are somehow completely emancipated from them. The decision to separate from Cerberus is Shepard's and not the players, and while I think that it should have been the other way around, I understand why that wouldn't have worked in the framework of the story. What I don't understand is why Cerberus is treated as just pure evil right from the get-go, while the first game showed you how they aren't that bad anymore, actually. You aren't allowed to question why Cerberus is doing what they're doing. Or you can, but everyone else will just brush it away and claim that they have always been like this. It isn't till much later in the plot till you start to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. But till you reach that point, you just have to be okay with an overwhelmingly negative sentiment from everyone towards Cerberus due to their irrevocably evil actions which go unjustified for the majority of the plot. The opening also sets up Kaiden's distrust of Shepard, which honestly just made me want to renegade QTE him. It was annoying in the last game and it's annoying in this one, but its payoff is actually thematically fitting, so I won't hark on about it just now. Another thing except the deep blacks of the game that is immediately noticeable is just how hench all the men are. Seriously, the Galactic War has them all pumping space steroids or something. Everyone looks like a thumb and it's kinda disconcerting. Anyway, you gallop after Anderson till eventually you are evacuated. But Anderson decides to stay on Earth and rally its forces because the game needs a way to make the decision you made regarding the human council way back in the first game redundant. Udina needs to be the councilman for a specific plot beat to play out. The game undermines decisions you made in previous games repeatedly, and it gets aggravating after a point. For now, though, we're off to Mars with Kaiden and a new companion, James Vega. I don't like Vega, but it's mostly because I don't like extroverted gym bros. Examining his character as just that, though, I think they achieved what they set out to do, so that's something. On Mars, you find Liara. and her intimidating personality is much less disorientating than it was in the Lair of the Shadow Broker DLC. I can only imagine how confused someone who hasn't played the DLC would be. Anyway, someone on this Martian facility is trying to steal valuable data about a protein device, which might be the key to stopping the Reapers. After a terrible chase where the camera refuses to move with the right stick while you're running, we catch the Cerberus spy, and it turns out to be an android of some sort. We take the deactivated synthetic aboard the Normandy. Caden gets hurt in the process, and we're forced to take him to the Citadel. I believe that this is also where we have a nightmare in which we are following a child who we saw die on Earth. I hate children though, so this had no emotional impact on me. Also, I don't understand why this child had to be shoehorned in to arbitrarily up the stakes. The game is literally about the galaxy being invaded by seemingly unsurmountable foes. The stakes are high as could be. Back on the Reaper's death device, the Citadel has been redesigned yet again. Now you can explore a bunch of really varied locations, from the embassies to the Presidium Marketplace, to a nightclub, a hospital, and docks that are admitting refugees. Aboard the Citadel, you will frequently hear ambient conversations. Eavesdropping on some of these unlocks certain side quests, which involve retrieving assets from planets and then returning to the Citadel to turn the quests in. Fetch quests are easy to make, and this game is chock full of them. There's some other quests too, like Kasmi's quest, which have you running around the Citadel, but those are also devoid of any interesting gameplay. Since you're reinstated as a Spectre, you can also commission certain projects from a Spectre terminal to further add to your war assets. On your first outing on the Citadel, you can hire a bunch of crew members for the Normandy, who also, big shocker here, add to the war assets. I suppose it's time to talk about the war assets in detail. Technically, these constitute the main gameplay loop, but they tie significantly into the story as well, so I'll talk about them here. In Mass Effect 3, the secondary objective, apart from assembling the Crucible, is to gather war assets to increase the readiness level of the galaxy to fend off the Reaper threat. Shepard is a Wall Street bro now, so he believes in diversifying his assets to maximize profit. Attaining assets generally involves completing either combat-heavy side quests, like one that has you go to Charles Xavier School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, or has you creepily listen in on people's conversations on the Citadel and later give them what they want. They don't seem to find it odd that the creepy man who stood around listening to them as they talked to their friends literally went halfway across the universe to get them back a book or something, so we won't dwell on it either. Anyway, accumulating enough war assets plays a role in how the finale plays out and which endings you can unlock. I would complain that it rewards completionists and takes away from meaningful decision making, but its consequences are so massively underwhelming that this argument holds no water. We'll talk more about these consequences later though. Right now, I'm going to give a broad overview of how Mass Effect 3 approaches its plot before delving deeper into the specific plot beats. Essentially, the story involves Shepard fixing every single major conflict in the galaxy while the Crucible gets built in the background. For the Salarians and Krogans, and the Quarians and Geth, the conflicts that need to be resolved have been set up right from the first game, who did not have a major conflict set up. Protein devices and Reaper threats need to be resolved instead. In this way, we are rallying all the most prolific alien races in a bid to unite the galaxy against imminent doom. Apart from James, there are two other new squad mates who assist us in this task. The first of these is ED, the Normandy's AI, who was unshackled in the second game and gains a corporeal form in this one through the body of the Cerberus spy we had just defeated. The other is Javik, a protein who just woke up from a really long nap. ED is an excellent character. The plot of Mass Effect 3 challenges our views on synthetics even more than the second one did, and having such a likable synthetic squad mate who shows a great willingness to learn about her new sentience can make the player more sympathetic towards them. Javik is a DLC character, and he isn't allowed to have as major an impact on the plot as would otherwise be expected from an ancient and extinct alien race. His memories of the primal forms of the currently dominant alien races can be humorous, but he is underutilized as far as confronting the Reapers is concerned, a byproduct of him being added post-launch. Returning crew members take the form of everyone's favorite handsome boy, everyone's favorite blue girl, everyone's favorite migrant girl, and everyone Caden. Apart from James, I loved pretty much every single one of the squad mates, and yes, I'm including Caden on the list, but the reason why he makes the cut is vastly different from the source of my appreciation for the rest of the characters. Liara, Garrus, and Tari have had arcs that finally see their logical conclusion after being set up way back in the first game. Not only is it great to have these familiar faces around, going back and realizing just how much they've changed for the better makes interacting with them that bit more enjoyable. Interactions with them are more limited though, since most of the time when you go to talk to them on the Normandy, they'll give you a few lines of dialogue and you won't have a choice in how to respond to them. Still, I appreciate that you can have many dates with these guys on the Citadel as well. This is going to sound weird because they're literally just lines of code with associated 3D models, but it feels good to be able to tell them just how much I care for them. Back to Caden though. The reason why I enjoyed having him on the squad this time was because I decided to romance him. He was very forthcoming about how he desperately needed something to come back to after the war. Not the best reason to seek out love, but we'll let it slide because Mans actually cooks for you and has some fairly sweet dialogue if you decide to become his betrothed. This did mean that I accidentally logged myself out of a relationship with Diara, but oh well, at least I got me a good snack. Squadmates who don't make a reappearance as part of the main cast do have some fairly prominent roles. We'll talk about Morden and Legion when we get to that part of the discussion of the main plot, but I want to focus on Miranda's plotline for just a second. How poorly it is handled, to be exact. You can FaceTime Miranda a couple of times on the Citadel, and she tells you that there's something going on with her sister. She does this 3 times. And it seems like this is setting up some sort of side quest that will be shrouded in mystery. But no, it just turns out that her father is working with the elusive man on evil experiments, and you need to take him out through the course of the main plot. Why Miranda wouldn't tell Shepard this, I don't know. Her secrecy regarding the whole affair is extremely strange, but letting her kill her father in an act of vengeance did feel good. Back to the main plot, as I mentioned, we are trying to resolve some major galactic conflicts. The issue is that the Turians and the Asari don't have any ongoing interracial conflict. This means that we just have to help them directly deal with the Reapers. First, we head to a moon of the Turians' homeworld to retard some Reapers that are ravaging through Turian forces. The funny thing is, apart from the indoctrinated enemies, all the Reapers look more or less the same. The game hasn't retconned the fact that Reapers train the essence of their enemies to reproduce. It just doesn't seem to care enough about it to make them all visually distinct. We end up saving a Turian Primarch, but we can't do much against the Reapers. The next set of missions involves the Krogan Genophage, but I didn't attempt that first. No, I made the mistake of delving into the DLC before doing the main missions. I say that this was a mistake because I was greatly unprepared for the extended combat sequences the Omega DLC throws you into. The premise of the Omega DLC is quite appealing. Arya Talok, having been displaced from Omega, plans a coup to take it back. You actually get to play with Arya as well as Nyreen, the first prominent female Turian in this entire franchise. The DLC is quite combat heavy, but helping Arya get back on her throne as the iron-fisted ruler of the criminal paradise felt like a monumental achievement. You can also end up making her more soft-hearted through your dialogue choices, but I like Arya how she is, irrevocably evil. The other DLC takes a page or two out of Lovecraft's books. The Leviathan DLC is Eleanor Light. It sees you undertake a galaxy-wide investigation into the death of a scientist and a new method of indoctrination. You would expect mind control to be a rarity, but just about everyone from the Rachni to the Reapers and even some enhanced humans can engage in it apparently. Anyway, your investigation leads you to an alien race that predates the Reapers, one that was involved in their creation. It's all fascinating stuff, with the only issue being that this race is also restricted to being a war asset. Since all this content was added post-launch, it couldn't have had as massive of an impact on Mass Effect 3's plot as it should have. It ends up being underwhelming and honestly kind of disappointing because of this. After all of that travel, we finally make our way to the Salarian home planet to rescue a Krogan female who has been extensively experimented on. This experimentation wasn't inconsequential, since it led to the synthesis of a cure for the genophage. Now it's time to go to Tuchanka to disperse this cure. You get to decide whether or not to actually disperse it. You can also simply lie to the Krogans, and the Salarian councilwoman tells you that you will have her support if you do this. The game does something really intelligent here. Instead of just portraying the Krogans as forces of violence, it has you go through some old Krogan monuments that have been lost to time. This makes the Krogans seem more like an actual people with an actual history than ever before, and it's sure to have an impact on your decision. As if that wasn't enough, Morden has seen the errors of his ways, to the point that he's willing to sacrifice himself to disperse the cure. The only way to stop him from doing this, in fact, is to shoot him dead. Even as he faces death, he sings his lines from the Salarian musical. He'll forever be my favorite squad mate, no questions asked. Having resolved the Salarian-Krogan conflict, we make our way to the Citadel, only to find that Odina has staged a coup with the assistance of Cerberus and is about to kill the Council if we don't make our way to them post-haste. There are so many things wrong with this plot beat. Even if you read all the notes detailing how he managed to assemble Cerberus forces in the first place, his motivation is confusing at best and downright moronic at worst. What does he even intend to do after killing the Council? Who will accept him as the sole ruler anyway? The only possible explanation I can think of is something that ties to the game's ending, but it doesn't make sense chronologically, at least from what I can tell. We'll come back to this because there's another baffling plot decision made here. This game introduces Kai Leng, who seems to be an indestructible force of cybernetics hailing from the land of bland personalities that Caden once found himself in. This character is not built on at all. He's meant to be threatening, but he just adds to the weirdness that surrounds Cerberus. He killed Thane, though, so we do have a reason to seek him out and take revenge for everyone's favorite emo frogman. The next story arc involves the next major interracial conflict. The Quarians decided that the destruction of the universe was the best time to try and take their home planet back from the Geth. The Geth responded to this by aligning themselves with the Reapers to launch a suitable counterattack. This whole situation just makes the Quarians seem like they have a lower IQ than an Elcor has EQ. It seems like this plan was devised and executed by only one of the Quarian ambassadors. How messed up did their political structure have to be to allow for this? Get over these contrivances, and your first order of business is to detach Legion to weaken and destroy a massive Geth fighter ship. Then, you just need to make your way to the Quarian home planet to eliminate the Reaper signal that's making the Geth stronger. There is an interim mission here that involves going into the Geth collective to get rid of Reaper corruption, and it's a visual treat. It also disposes some pretty important exposition about the time the Geth turned on the Quarians, and how Geth sympathizers were treated as mercilessly as the Geth themselves. After this, you can make your way to the Geth's base to destroy the signal. You can also choose to either get all the Geth killed, or you can urge them to coexist with the Quarians. Loyalty missions and past decisions play an important role here. If you don't meet certain requirements, the Geth may just kill off all the Quarians, and Tali will choose to end her life along with them. If you manage to get the Geth to agree, though, Legion dies. There's literally no reason for this to happen. The in-game explanation is that Legion had to sacrifice itself to grant the rest of the Geth's personality so they don't end up like Jacob, but this does not hold up under any scrutiny. Legion already had personality traits, that's why it wore Shepard's armor to begin with. This death feels like they were just trying to meet a minimum criteria of emotional damage inflicted on the player. With that, though, it's time to help the Asari and have them help you in return. One of the components of the Crucible is the Catalyst, and the Asari Councilwoman intimates you with the location of the Catalyst, and it's on Thessia, the Asari home planet. The funny thing about the plot is that you have very little involvement in the construction of the Crucible. In fact, you're only involved in getting the process started and adding the last element. It's just being built in the background as you try to make frenemies with the rest of the universe. The war assets do augment it, but you do not see these improvements being added directly either. But now it's time to go to Thessia and obtain the catalyst. Turns out there were Prothean ruins on Thessia which contributed to the development of the Asari and were seemingly Area 57'd by the Asari government. Right as you're trying to figure out what the deal with the Prothean VI and the ruins is, Kai Leng turns up to pull a David Blaine. You talk to the elusive man here and he tells you why Cerberus has been doing all this evil shit. Turns out, the elusive man isn't satisfied just destroying the Reapers. No, he wants to indoctrinate them to make humanity more powerful than ever. The elusive man is trying to pull a quick one on the Reapers, but it's very evident that he has himself been indoctrinated by them. They're giving him the Saren treatment, slowly making him more machine than man, increasing their hold over him in the process. I don't love what they've done with Cerberus here. The entire time you're wondering why Cerberus is plain deplorable all of a sudden, and now it turns out that they're being mobilized by the Reapers and the endless greed of the elusive man. I can't think of a single way to improve this plot. Any ideas that I might have would require complete rewrites of the script from start to finish, something that you're probably thinking about this video too, I'm sure. Anyway, now it's time to track down Cerberus HQ and figure out what the catalyst is. Before that though, I decided to tackle the Citadel DLC. I had heard a lot about this DLC, but even I wasn't prepared for just how much content there is. This DLC feels like two DLCs rolled into one scrumptious concoction, topped with garnishes that fans of the series will devour. It is a complete tonal disconnect from the rest of the story though. It trades the gritty tone of the game for pure camp, and I'm here for it. It would definitely work better as an epilogue, but the ending of the game doesn't exactly leave room for an epilogue, so we'll just have to be happy with what you've got. The first part of the DLC involves tracking down a clone of Shepard from the Lazarus Project, a clone who's trying to take his place. Throughout the entire game, the devs have had to look for ways to split up the party in the most unnatural of ways to prevent you from having support from NPCs who aren't an active part of your squad. Here, though, all the squad members, along with returning characters like Rex and Samara, take part in an extended Scooby-Doo like chase. You're actively collaborating with all your teammates, and you can see them all in action as they help you and as you help them. Even disregarding the potential that the existence of Shepard clones has for the future of the series, just the way that you're finally allowed to see everyone in action at once makes this portion of the DLC an absolute delight. The second part of the DLC is what most people remember fondly. Forced to take a short break, you can use Anderson's party crypt to throw the party of a lifetime. A celebration of all of the characters that you know and love, plus Jacob. There are so many in-jokes and references here. You can tell that this DLC was made with pure love and admiration for each of these characters. You can also roam around on the strip right outside the apartment complex, interact with squad mates one-on-one, and even play some mini-games. By the time that the DLC is over, though, you're left with a hollowness. Reminded of the fact that the galaxy is on the brink of destruction as you live it up in Daddy's high-end apartment. I wish there was some way to integrate this DLC as a proper epilogue, but the less said about the ending, the better. But I will be saying a lot about the ending, so stay tuned for that. God, this is an awkward segue. Horizon! It's time to go to Horizon and investigate what Cerberus has been up to. The issue is that we were literally just told about their motivation, and we already know that they've been abducting people. So I think that most of us can put two and two together to figure out that the elusive man was conducting experiments on indoctrination on humans. But the game feels the need to spell this out for you. Miranda and her father are also here, and this is where you get to see her in person as her arc meets an abrupt ending. I feel like this mission could have been cut out entirely and Miranda's side quest be fleshed out to be its own thing independent of the main plot. With the location of Cerberus HQ finally on our galaxy map, we can head there to reacquire the VI and put an end to this war. Fighting through Cerberus HQ is made interesting by some voice notes that give you backstory on the AI that inhabited ED's new body, as well as on the Lazarus project. Eventually though, we make our way to the elusive man's room, complete with the half and half sun in the background. Here, we engage in an absolutely laborious boss fight with the token minority Raiden. His plot armor is now turned into literal armor. He counteracts all damage you inflict on him till you defeat the ads that he summons. It's just grueling, but you get to take revenge for Thane's murder, so that's something. The Prothean VI tells you that the catalyst is the Citadel. So, with this information, you finally assemble the Crucible. Except, the Reapers have transported the Citadel to the Earth's orbit, and you need to untether it to allow for it to be integrated with the Crucible. The plot goes full circle, and it's time to return to Earth for your last stand. The mission starts off with Cortez, the Uber driver who commands the space car you travel around in, dying. Although I suppose Lyft is a more apt reference here anyway. Man dies, you make your way through to the base of operations for humans, and have the option to say your last goodbyes to your team. This is a truly heartwarming section, and it gave me hope for the ending. Misplaced hope for the ending. Continue on and you're forced into one of the toughest and most frustrating combat sections of the game. You need to first defend and then interact with a certain device while the game throws seemingly infinite hordes of the toughest, most spammy enemies it can think of at you. This is where the press X to do basically everything control scheme really screwed me over. Getting Shep to interact with the damn device was near impossible, and it didn't help that restarting the checkpoint set Shep diametrically opposite the stupid thing. It doesn't help either that the Reaper has enabled one-hit kill mode and is just raining down death beam upon death beam on the battlefield. This section is aggravating to say the least. Deal with all of this and you're separated from the rest of your squad as you're forced to make a painfully slow final stand to get to the tree from Elden Ring. Ludonarrative dissonance aside, the game thinks the best way to make you feel that Shepard is hurt is to force you to move slowly. I hate such sections in games. I get that they're supposed to convey the feeling that your character is impaired, and they achieve this purpose, but this specific section goes on for way too long. Even after you're aboard the Citadel, you still move really slowly. The lead up to the ending is truly dull. Intentionally so, but dull nonetheless. Speaking of the Citadel, it's a terrifying sight. Shep finds themselves in a labyrinth of sorts, a part of the Citadel which didn't even exist before. There are bodies strewn about everywhere, and the keepers are ominously habituated to their presence. Lug along to Anderson, and the final confrontation with the elusive man plays out. This confrontation is dependent on the dialogue choices that you made in your previous interactions with the elusive man. This confrontation is also so ridiculously inconsequential that it's insulting. No matter what you do, the elusive man will die, and Anderson will pass out from his injuries, presumably meeting the same fate. You can also get Anderson shot to death, but the end result will be the same. Anderson will die no matter what you do, and so will the elusive man. The only difference is whether or not he takes his own life. This parallels Saren's death from the first game, but unlike the first game, where getting Saren to shoot himself had a tangible benefit of allowing you to skip a whole boss fight, here it has absolutely zero implications, even more so because of the actual ending of the game. It also makes suicide and indoctrination the only two constants across the series, since the elusive man is somehow able to indoctrinate Shepard into shooting Anderson. We already knew that the elusive man had been trying to master indoctrination, so it makes sense that he is able to exert control over Shep. My problem with this is how underused the elusive man's indoctrination ability actually is. It is used only once during the entire plot, right at the end, and the elusive man can't even use it to save himself from being killed by Shep. Unless you also subscribe to the theory that he used it to force Odina into compromising the Citadel, but we already know how inconsequential that plot beat was. To me, it feels like they were building up to us being able to convince the elusive man to use indoctrination against the Reapers, like he originally intended. Maybe the purpose of the charm and intimidate options in your previous conversations with him was to set up this exact interaction. But this is just wild speculation, and there's no vestige of this scene in the actual ending, so I'm inclined to believe that this wasn't a planned alternative. With that, I suppose it's time to talk about the ending. Dear God, the ending. The more attentive amongst you might have noticed that I failed to mention the role the war assets play in the ending. This is because, unlike Mass Effect 2, where your completion of loyalty missions leading up to the suicide mission had a pervasive and clear effect on nearly every single aspect of the ending, the amount of war assets you recover determine which of the endings you can unlock. Instead of seeing all the forces you managed to gather unite in the Galactic War, instead of getting help from the various alien races you assisted during the battle on Earth, the war assets are simply a number. A number that, if it exceeds a certain threshold, makes more choices available to you. And this makes absolutely zero sense. See, upon uniting the Citadel with the Crucible, you unleash the true catalyst, and it's some sort of VI that moderates the Reaper's actions. It takes the form of the child from the start of the game for some god-forsaken reason, and you have a nice little chat with it as it explains all the possible endings to you. The first ending involves an indiscriminate destruction of all synthetic life in the galaxy. The Reapers go, sure, but so do the Geth, ED, and all other synthetics. The second ending allows Shep to interface with the Reapers and control them somehow. The extent of this control is not explained, and neither are the implications of fragmenting Shepard's consciousness into potentially thousands of ultra-powerful beings. The final ending, the right one, allows you to send out a pulse that magically integrates synthetic and organic beings, making everyone part synthetic and part organic. There's another ending, one that I inadvertently chose during my playthrough, which the game doesn't even reward you the trophy for finishing the game for. This ending has Shepard firmly refuse all of these options, and it results in the death of all life in the galaxy as we know it. But it allows the beings in the next cycle to overcome the Reaper threat using the knowledge we have gained. These endings are all, pardon my ancient Greek with an American dialect, bullshit, even with their extended versions. I'm willing to take the magical properties of the Crucible at face value, but the issues with the ending transcend the lack of explanation given about the catalyst and the way in which the Crucible functions. No, the biggest problem with the ending is how it seems to miss the point of the series as a whole, of everything that the series was building up to, right from the first game. We have been taught to sympathize with the Geth, acknowledge their existence as sentient beings in their own right, from way back in Mass Effect 1. Mass Effect 2 made this an even more prominent theme by putting Legion on the Normandy, and Mass Effect 3 hammered this point home by having you deal with the conflict between the Quarians and the Geths. Not only that, it gave ED a body as well as a drive to understand emotions. The whole series has been telling you that synthetics are just misunderstood, that organics and synthetics can coexist if they just try, and the catalyst tells you that this is impossible. Its assessment is based on past experience and it's willing to generalize that experience to the cycle despite repeatedly stating that the cycle is unlike any other. God, kids are dumb. Instead of forcing us to merge synthetics and organics and somehow killing Shepard in the process, wouldn't it make more sense to have an ending where Shepard's actions convince the catalyst that synthetics and organics can get along? Actually, forget about all of that. Even if you're willing to take the catalyst at face value, these endings are still inadequate. Gathering war assets unlocks more ending choices at the end. Why? How is being more prepared to deal with the Reapers doing anything except making us, well, more prepared to deal with the Reapers? Throughout the game, we have seen multiple Reapers being killed, and we've played a role in their demise. The Reapers have been established as being fallible, and it's not a stretch of the imagination that all the forces in the universe working together would be able to take them out. An ending where the galaxy takes a last stand against the Reapers and wins based on war assets alone is feasible, and it makes more sense than most of these endings anyway. Sure, we'll suffer heavy casualties, and you can kill Shepard too if you want, since you seem to be so intent on doing it anyway, but this should be an option. I should mention that I don't have a problem with Shep dying. The grittier tone of the game would indicate a sacrifice of epic proportions if the galaxy is to be saved, but I just want to have a good reason for Shepard's death beyond it simply eliciting an emotional reaction from the player. In trying to get the players to feel melancholic about the ending of the franchise, the writers seem to have forgotten to weave a cohesive plot that doesn't crumble to pieces on being even remotely scrutinized. I wish I could say that the endings of Mass Effect 3 made me feel anything but hollow. Like I was cheated out of a moment which should have impacted me greatly, given how invested I was in the series by the time I reached the conclusion of the trilogy. Despite its gameplay innovations, the reappearances of beloved characters, and compelling DLCs, Mass Effect 3 fails to meet the most fundamental expectation from the climax of one of the most beloved and recognizable franchises in all of gaming history: a satisfactory resolution. Well, that was a lot. Time to summarize. What's really interesting about these games is that, while the trilogy tells a singular story, the theme shifts radically from one game to the next, and their color palette shifts with it. The first game is entirely focused on setup. It's all about living the sci fi fantasy as a space soldier who gets in deep over their head, being forced into a plot that could lead to the death of all living beings in the galaxy. It's honestly impressive, the depth of the universe the writers managed to build, and the creative ways in which they negotiated the feeling of being overwhelmed that would naturally come with interstellar travel and the discovery of alien races, with their duty to the player to still keep everything manageable. The gameplay mechanics themselves have aged poorly, but the lore far exceeds most present day games, not only in how well written it is, but also in how well it is presented. Mass Effect 2 goes for a more grungy look, with the temperature being turned way up. This fits its focus on action and set pieces. What shines through in Mass Effect 2 story-wise are the characters. Each and every single one of them, with the exception of Jacob, are full of personality, and interactions with them are always engaging. The main plot takes a back seat and barely plays a role in the finale, if we're being honest. And the game underutilizes Shepard's transitory relationship with Cerberus and the implications of this affiliation. But who can complain about the story when the characters are this damn good? With Mass Effect 3, the gameplay mechanics are tweaked to near perfection. The game plays excellently, but its story stumbles, and it stumbles hard. I think I underestimated how much the game uses past decisions when I made my video on it, but there's no denying that the whole war asset mechanic makes very little sense in its role in shaping the ending. The ending itself is still terrible. Seriously, no argument that I have seen online has been able to convince me otherwise. It seems to me that BioWare messed up with the original ending to such an unthinkable degree that players just sort of accepted the amended one. The characters are great as ever, and the independent storylines and conflicts you have to resolve are at par with the main plot of the original game. I just wish that they had made a game solely based on these plot lines and then addressed the Reapers in a separate title. But the allure of presenting an extended story as a trilogy is too great, I suppose. Even if you have to annex said trilogy with DLC to satisfy its fans to some degree. And that leaves us with one last thing, the next Mass Effect. Having gone through the trailer a few times, what stands out to me is how little it actually tells us. I get that it's a teaser, but come on, give us a little more to theorize about BioWare. The next game seems to be bringing Shepard back in some capacity, considering that we see an Asari, presumably Liara, find a shard of the N7 armor. The announcements we hear over intercom at the start indicate that humanity stands at par with the other alien races now, and we can assume that this is owing to their role in the downfall of the Reapers. The trailer also does not seem to commit to any particular ending from Mass Effect 3, although, considering that the Asari did not have green eyes, we can assume that the synthesis ending is ruled out. Does that mean that all AIs are destroyed? And does this also prevent more from being developed in the future? Or are we perhaps going with the control ending, with its rather confounding premise of letting Shepard take over all Reapers? Well, I personally think that it's none of that. See, in Mass Effect 2, we are told that Liara was, at least in part, responsible for finding the fragments of Shepard. What I think we're seeing here is Liara's hunt. That would explain why we only see part of the suit, and why she's looking for it in the first place. The announcement at the start could be referring to humanity's defeat of Saren, which landed them a position on the Council. Maybe, for the first time, BioWare will give the players what they want and let them play as an alien, maybe Liara, maybe somebody else, as Shepard's revival takes place in the background. Maybe this will bridge the gap between Mass Effect 2's start and Shepard's revival, and maybe the reception of the game will guide BioWare's future endeavors. Even all these years later, I doubt that they'll want to touch the minefield that is the Mass Effect trilogy's ending. They could retcon it, but people will protest that as well. Doesn't it make sense to go back to a simpler time? Or maybe it is just a straight sequel considering the reference to the arcs and the dreadnoughts. Or who knows, maybe they'll connect it to Andromeda somehow and bring back those facial animations. Oh dear god.